Sally, I hear something. Stop. Stop.
There. Is the tone set for this one? Good. Let's get into it before someone complains I didn't talk about the movie for X amount of seconds and I can go back to playing RuneScape.
We're at 1100 Eagle Road. The flame front has passed us and is moving north along I-5. Construction is right with the flame.
And although meth has been a problem in the past, another drug is on the rise in the Rogue Valley.
Just to put that in comparison, if you look at 2004 to 2011, that entire 8-year period, we had a total of 14 heroin overdose deaths. Sometimes heroin is a relatively inexpensive alternative.
Many Republicans opposed the bill because of concerns over new protections for gays and lesbians and the expanded authority of tribal courts.
So apparently when he hit me, he hit so hard, I flew back, hit the headrest of the seat, and the seat broke off at the base.
I think it's time I talk about one of my favorite movies, like, ever. I don't think it's fair to say I'd be the same kind of guy without this film, because not only do I hold this movie over something as mind-tickling as Begotten, or as deep and sentimental as Silent Hill 2. Man, this is just my kind of movie, and I think we all have one of those movies. You know the one. There's always that one movie that you can watch over and over, and it never ceases to make you feel similar to the first time you saw it, because it left such an impact. For some, it's a wonderful animation that never left your mind after childhood and makes you feel all warm inside. For some, it's a spicy movie that you recall watching to get you fired up before a long, passion-filled night of debauchery. For me, well, I'm just built different. I grew up pretty poor in the middle of nowhere with hardly anyone around me but animals and the occasional murderous or crazy neighbor. No joke, I lived on a 100-acre farm and my next-door neighbor raised hundreds of pigs for slaughter. The neighbors across us directly were some of the most notorious meth dealers in all of Southern Oregon. The people further down from us were secluded, flighty, and dangerous hermits, and all around us, nothing. Nowhere. And this ever-present sense of isolation in a long-forgotten place and time. Like, if you scraped the stones inside of a dried-out creek, the sound would travel down through some ancient tunnels into a world that time forgot, covered in some dead moss and animal bones or shit. So, does that explain why one of my all-time favorite films, right under Pulp Fiction, is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Well, duh. Like I said, some people, they like films that comfort them, or that bring them some sense of nostalgia. I like films that remind me of the bleakest aspects of both humanity and nature because I'm broken and damaged and that's what gets me off. TCM is a colossal film, and it's one of those films you'll hear people say is one of the best horror movies ever made, or as the kids say, scary AF, and you know what? They're actually 100% correct. This movie is indeed scary as fuck, and it is indeed a juggernaut amongst horror films, especially for the time it came out. Now, there's this group of people who will complain that the movie is too shallow or too short or not gory enough, and to all of you out there that think that, you're fucking wrong! I'm right, and if you agree with me, you're a great person, and you're totally handsome and beautiful and get all the boys or girls. Or both. It's 2025, I have to stop being so goddamn heteronormative, okay? So why am I talking about this film? Well, quite frankly, because I love it and want to talk about it, and to prove to the other cool guys out there that there's a lot going on in this film and makes you feel like you learned something in the process at the end of this. This is an educational channel, damn it. You're going to learn something by the end of this, unlike those other hacks out there who want to sell you NordVPN and repeat the same 10 things about this movie. Now, just a bit of context about myself. If this is your first video of mine, you don't have to watch everything on screen if you don't want to. I'm a very non-visual person, and my strength lies in writing and presentation, so I don't really care if you lower the video and do something else. Second, I do not own the film, claim to own the film, or have any affiliations with the film, so all the footage is strictly for educational and analytical purposes, so if this somehow gets flags, hey YouTube, Figure it out. There's entire films and albums on the platform that are more important than my sweary breakdown. Also, I don't believe in running ads on my videos, so if you see one, slap that shit off with an ad blocker or something and give the system the middle finger. However, if you want to, I have a Patreon in the description, and all the money I get through that goes to mainly just my cat who has diabetes, the stray animals I feed, and that's about it. I have a full-time job, I'm a big boy and take care of myself. YouTube is a passion hobby for me, and I have no intention of trying to shove product placement or bullshit down your throat. I just want to discuss the movie and have some fun. So, without further ado, why don't you folks come on in for some barbecue? Won't you stay? So, are you ready? Good. This video series is going to be broken into 3 sections: the synopsis, a scene-by-scene breakdown, and my personal experience with the film. I'm also going to just call the movie TCM from now on. It's not like I'm going to be talking about Turner Classic Movies or the hip new band Titty Cock Magnet. I can talk about that later if you want, but I don't think you want to hear about that right now. TCM was directed by Tobe Hooper and was released in 1974, and I think we all know this by now, but if you don't, it was made with the absolute shoeiest of shoestring budgets. This not only gives the film a very grounded, real-world vibe, but it adds something special to the vibe that's really difficult to replicate even today. There's this deep sense of darkness to the shot compositions, coupled with a thin layer of sweat and grime, all washed over with film grain. It's fucking unsettling and amazing. The tone is also something that further films in the franchise try so hard to replicate, but they just can't get it down, and honestly, it's for the better, and I think it's what makes the first TCM really feel like it was lightning in a bottle. There's still people to this day that think that this was a real event. I'm not even kidding, whether it be blissful ignorance, misinformation, or, you know, those kinds of people. I can't stress it enough, man, okay? Let's do a little roleplay, and please don't click off after I said that. Imagine you're a stupid kid in the 70s. You got some stupid hair, some stupid clothes, and have some stupid friends. The internet doesn't exist yet, and you can't just go on Best Gore to make yourself sick, so you do the next best thing and somehow get into the theater to go see TCM. If you heard that opening crawl with zero way to prove it, I guarantee you, you'd believe that this actually happened. And you know what? It could happen. So let's talk about why you're here. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oil storage units continue to burn out of control at the huge Texaco refinery near the Texas-Louisiana border.
This masterclass of film starts out with no music, just some names without proper grammar, and then a narration for what you're about to see. We get to know some names and that this film is a retelling of a horrible crime dubbed The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Also, those curious, this wasn't going to be the name of the film either. It was actually going to be called either Head Cheese or Leatherface, which this movie also gladly tells you how head cheese is made, by the way. Not only is it fun, it's an educational film. They could even make a video game. Oh, wait. We then hear nothing for a bit, and we get to hear what sounds like digging, struggle, and a few spooky images of a corpse. I'll also, like I said earlier, be doing a deep, thorough dive on all this stuff in the next video, so if you want to know more about the artsy side of the video, just wait. After a bit, we get a cool pan-out shot revealing the corpse is stuck on a grave attached to another body, and oh god, let me just say, this movie makes you feel the heat of Texas. I'm from Oregon, and yeah, we get some nasty triple-digit weather, but shit, this movie just makes you feel sticky by the end of it. And not in that way. The radio in the background starts to talk about things we're looking at, leaving the viewer to just take in this absurdity. And like, this whole scene is just a wonderful start for what you're about to watch. It sets it all up right here. Hot, gross, and surreal. Just like your mom. We're then treated to a cool shot of the sun as the radio continues to tell you about Detroit crime, all of this fucking incredible ambient piece. Now, you all know how I really don't like to spoil my own thoughts, but I have to say briefly that holy fuck, Tobe Hooper's soundtrack for this film is arguably my favorite score to a film, like, ever. It's haunting, chaotic, brooding, and no amount of adjectives can describe how it makes me feel, and I can't stress it enough, it adds so much to the atmosphere of this film, but you know me, I'll talk about it later. Eventually we're introduced to our cast, and believe it or not, as many times since I've seen this film, I can only remember 2 characters' names because they're barely relevant, but they do have some differences in personality traits, and like always, I'll talk about each character later on, because there is some nuance to their outfits and mannerisms. I said mannerisms, damn it, get your mind out of the gutter. The man in blue is named Kirk, who initially in my note-taking session I was writing as Kurt for a while. Oops. He's the boyfriend of Pam, the woman reading the new age hippie bullshit book. Jerry is the guy driving the van, rocking threads that prove why I think the 70s had the most fuck-ugly fashion of all time. Now, it's never really mentioned, but I think it's implied that Jerry is with Sally, who's actually the lead of the film, and Franklin is her brother, the guy in the wheelchair. By the way, you know a movie is off to a good start when the first scene to introduce a character is them taking a piss into a coffee can, and then having to get blasted off the side of the road? Yeah, not a good look, man. Pam starts reading some bullshit that people actually still believe, while her friends just sort of sit there and humor her, and their van creeps over to the Pickle Graveyard, which is the same graveyard from a few shots ago, and we see that the news wasn't complete dog doo-doo for once, and people are all over the place in response to the grave robbing incident from earlier. This is why the group is here as well, because Franklin and Sally's grandfather was buried here, and they want to check to make sure things are still okay. We also get a subtle hint that this whole area is just kind of fucked up as well, because this dude is publicly drunk right near law enforcement, which is a 10 out of 10 idea, by the way. This weird moment really does add to the whole hyper-reality or uncertainty the film is trying to convey. I'll talk about what it means later on, but you know, I'll let you sink into this hot, nasty bath and just relax a bit. The group then coasts by a nearby slaughterhouse, and we learn Franklin really doesn't know how to communicate before they notice a nearby hitchhiker who, yeah, this is where I have to break my own in the vacuum rule for a minute and talk about, fuck me, the other TCM films. So as far as I'm concerned, the other TCM films are pretty shithouse. I don't think it's bad if you personally like them, they're still a fun ride, but nothing ever really captures the tone of this film, and as a standalone product, it's fine as is. TCM2, which is an actual sequel to this film, does give this guy a name briefly, but it's Nubbins. But as far as this analysis goes, I'll just call him either the brother or the hitchhiker. In the credits, he's just listed as the hitchhiker. By the way, canonically the family that the hitchhiker is part of is named the Sawyer family, which was introduced in the sequels as well. The group are obviously a little bit uncomfortable by this Dracula-looking motherfucker, but he does say my favorite line in this movie that I quote to this day because it tickles me just right.
Oh, that gun's no good.
Hitch then shows Franklin some spicy nudes and talks about his love of meat like Hank Hill would talk about propane. This doesn't bode well as he takes Franklin's knife from him and cuts his life into pieces, and as a last resort takes Franklin's picture. When nobody wants to pay him a whopping $2, he decides to do some magic with a K, cut Franklin, and get his ass booted back outside. The best course of action after a traumatic incident, according to Pam, is to read Sally and Franklin's horoscope rather than, calling the fucking cops like Kirk was wanting to do, but that's fine, it was the 70s, I guess. The gang then drives to a gas station, and if you're keen-eyed, you'll notice that the sign reads, "We Slaughter Barbecue," which is a clever dark joke, but the family still canonically is named Sawyer. The place is ran by Drayton Sawyer, who also appears in the sequel, but here he's just called the cook, and in the credits is just listed as Old Man. Franklin asks if Drayton knows where the Franklin house is. Yeah, his dad's named Franklin, I'm guessing, because him and Sally's last name is Hardesty. I'm not sure if this was a continuity error, but it always bothered me for some reason. Either way, Drayton suggests the group just stick around the area for a while for the gas shipment to come in, and Jerry decides to double check if the gas station isn't the only one around. Franklin then asks Kirk a question even a fucking 4-year-old can answer, while expressing a growing concern about the hitchhiker they ran into. Jerry explains that the closest place to get gas is the nearby town of Newt, but the group still wants to go to the Franklin house, which now changes from Franklin's dad house to grandfather's house. Yeah, I never said this movie was perfect. Before she gets back in, Sally notices a bloody mark the hitchhiker left behind, and after the guys pull over to let Franklin look at it, he grows more paranoid, and to his credit, he's actually taking this kind of seriously, unlike everyone else who apparently just walked into a cloud of dank weed that's in the mystery relative's house. Franklin then has a complete mental breakdown, which, God, I love this movie. Anyways, Kirk and Pam ask about the swimming spot nearby, and as they leave, Franklin notices a peculiar oddity on the ground as well as in the door frame. We cut to Kirk and Pam talking mad shit about Franklin as they try to find the swimming spot when they hear a generator in the distance and try to think of a plan to get some gas from whoever's running it. Also, how the fuck would they not consider this trespassing? You can say I'm a pea-brained shut-in Oregonian and I don't understand the country. Oh, wait. But, man, even where I'm from, someone walking around your property is a big no-no. The two walk to the front of the house, and Kirk continues to be a complete tool bag by pissing off Pam, and essentially just barges into the house after knocking is a no-go. Now, call me crazy, but if I was this blue-clothed bastard, I would have turned around as soon as I saw the very ominous red skull-adorned wall with pig sounds coming from the distance. Like I said, I guess it was just the 70s. Kirk decides the best idea is to burst into a full-blown jog, trips like a fucking idiot, and bumps into the star of the TCM franchise, Leatherface. And what a wicked cool way to introduce him.
Did you just say wicked cool?
Yeah, dude. I'm 13 again.
Yes, what decade is this?
There's no music, sting, or screaming, just a quick camera shot and a hammer to Kirk's stupid blonde 70s head. Leatherface drags him off, slams the door shut, and Pam decides to see what's up, and we get one of the most iconic and important camera shots of all time. This scene isn't just a cool, oh look at that ass shot. No, this is a quality and sound camera work. So much that damn near every TCM movie after it tried to replicate it, and the inside of my DVD case has it on the inside. It's that good. Pam then goes into the house and then falls into the literal mouth of hell itself. Man, people in the 70s just sucked at everything. It must have been that ghastly fashion. Also, can I just take a minute and say this scene is one of the coolest things ever created by human hands? It's not just the music, that's just the lovely icing on the cake. It's the camera movement, the momentum of each angle ramping up, and the utterly bizarre and horrific decorations. It's like if you liquefied an existential crisis and filtered it through death metal, and it's fucking rad. In an attempt to call for Kirk, Pam dials 1-800-BIG-BOYS and summons Leatherface from the back room, who grabs her so fast it knocks her shoes off. Alright, quick pause because let's talk about it. We all know the thing I'm about to say next, but it's inevitable in a TCM retrospective to talk about it. This whole scene is one of the most non-gory and horrifying moments in the film. Your brain fills in what's not shown on camera. It's like a coloring book where you fill in the blood. It can't be stressed enough that TCM isn't a blood-soaked tit-flop and swear-fest of a movie. It's subdued on the visceral and plays highly into the psychological, and it's almost a cultural meme at this point that I honestly didn't even really want to bring it up, because literally everyone and their mother talks about it, but I guess I should mention it at some point or the other. The whole point of horror to me and many others is to trick the mind into thinking you're in danger, to experience a rush or a sense of unease. TCM is still a horror film, yeah, and some argue it's considered an exploitation film, but it's very much a psychological type of horror. It's a horror that sinks deep into your mind with little claws attached to decaying fingers which leave behind toxic grime after you pull them out. Yeah, it's that kind of scary, and I love it. We cut back to Jerry ripping on Franklin, who's still very much in the right for being nervous, I might add, before Jerry decides to go off and find the swimming spot. Probably to smoke some pot, because this is the 70s. Jerry eventually comes across a Sawyer house and notices one of the towels that Pam and Kirk brought with them, which makes him think that the couple is just playing games because, you know, this is the 70s. Unaware of the fact he's trespassing, Jerry goes into the back room and inspects a freezer where Pam's wriggling corpse freaks him out, and then Leatherface freaks him out. To death. Literally. Because this is the 70s. This scene also started a trend that every other TCM film would try to capitalize on, and you know what? I think it's fine in later films. Humanizing Leatherface. It's kind of a cliche in modern film, but it's pretty cool to see a movie of this age try to show that this guy isn't a complete sadist. Leatherface looks concerned and nervous, and you know, I love how Gunnar Hansen nails this role. He really makes you feel kind of bad for this lunatic. We then cut back to Sally and Franklin arguing about what to do next, and after what I'm assuming is a totally normal and healthy sibling argument, they head off to look for the rest of their group. After a fairly well-earned jump scare, Leatherface gets some more ammo off of Franklin and goes after Sally. Fuck, I can only imagine how this must have been to see in theaters the first time. It's truly a nerve-wracking chase scene. Sally eventually screams her way to the Sawyer house, gets inside, and bolts upstairs to find some help. Well, needless to say, she finds Grandpa and Grandma Sawyer, the latter of which is essentially mummified, along with her own collection of woodland critters and pets. Leatherface gets inside and forces Sally to commit property damage, and the chase continues back into the woods. The two tiptoe through the tulips back to the gas station from the start of the film, where Sally collapses into a mess in front of Drayton and asks for help. It's a nice attention to detail, by the way. If you notice that when Sally is staring at the sausages, you can see one of them's actually missing from the rightmost of the rack, and it's likely the one that Franklin ate earlier. That's cute, man. Drayton comes back with a smile and a rope, and man, like I said earlier, I can't imagine the actual shock in the audience on this twist. He knocks Sally out with the most weak slap a middle-aged man can muster with a broomstick and binds and gags her, stuffs her into a sack, and drives off with her. Eventually, Chef Boyardee runs into the hitchhiker from earlier and scolds him for his grave robbing, which also helps the audience make sense of who made all the weird corpse art that's in the house in the area. Drayton also confirms that Leatherface and the hitchhiker are brothers, and canonically, Drayton is the eldest brother of the three. We also see another staple of the later films. Leatherface's different masks that he puts on for different occasions. It's a small touch that adds to his character, in my opinion. After Hitch goes to get Grandpa from upstairs, we get a cool scene of the cook and his fragmented personality, which is just unsettling. Jim Sato did such a fantastic job of portraying this guy, and I can't blame them for getting him to come back for the sequel. He's just that great to watch. Grandpa eventually enters the scene, and it's at this point the audience realize that he's not actually dead, but barely alive, and drinks from Sally's finger, which causes her to faint. She then wakes up to yet another staple of every TCM film after, the dinner scene. This is such an iconic and important scene for a lot of reasons, and it's exactly why each dinner scene, copyright trademark, and the other films never captures the brutality and anxiety that this one really does. It's nerve-wracking, it's disorienting, it's hellish. Each second that passes is just this crescendo of crazy that never lets off the gas. It goes from 0 to 100 to 150 to 1,000, and the first time you watch it, it feels like you're trapped in Sally's sweaty and blood-drenched skin. The sounds, the facial expressions, fuck man, if you wanted to bottle up what depravity and cruelty is like, it's this. The boys decide to let Grandpa kill Sally, to which leads to the most intense moment of the film. After Grandpa's hands just aren't strong enough, Hitch loses his shit and lets go of Sally, accidentally letting her bolt out and cause more property damage. Leatherface and Hitch take chase, with Hitch wandering into the road as he cuts at Sally with his razor. An absolute unit of a man driving an absolute unit of a vehicle turns Hitch into a fucking mess of mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and giblets on the road. Sally comes limping along and screaming with Leatherface right on her ass, and I love how the trucker is just like, "Oh fuck this dude," and just bolts back to his rig. Also, I know Leatherface isn't exactly a powerhouse of intellect, but come on man, this is such a skill issue on his part. Trucker McGee grabs a wrench off the floor and beams Leatherface in his leather face, which makes him cut his leg. Yes, I know that was a real cut, but it was on a piece of meat with a metal plate protecting Gunner. The heat from the plate was what hurt him, not the chainsaw. Don't try to feel smart for telling me something I already know, you fucking sheep. However, Leatherface is a fucking Chad and gets up and still tries to go after Sally as an oncoming dude pulls a That's So 70s U-turn at the ensuing weirdness. I'd also like to point out that Trucker McGee just fucking books it, man. I bet to this day he's still running. Toby Hooper just said, "Run, man," and he took it literally because he never heard him say cut. That's a true story you hear so much about. Sally gets into the shitty Chevy and Leatherface gets left behind with one of the most iconic, frenetic, and jarring endings ever made. Also, congratulations, you can breathe. The movie's over. So, does Texas Chainsaw Massacre hold up even after all these years? Fuck, man, were you really expecting me to say no? Yes! Yes! This is arguably one of the most important, crucial, and impactful films of all time. It's not just me saying that, it's influenced fucking hundreds of people, from filmmakers to musicians and artists to idiots like me. There's a reason that people still talk about this movie rather than something like the Nail Gun Massacre. Okay, well, that movie's worth talking about for different reasons, but still. When it comes to the granddaddy of low-budget, anxiety-inducing, and realistic films, I don't even think you can come close to the 12-foot dick this film slaps you across the face with. Please pretend I didn't say that. It's grimy, sweaty, uncomfortable, and it lasts for an hour and a half. It doesn't matter how many times I watch this movie, as soon as it's over I feel less tense and like I just passed an emotional kidney stone. There's something so captivating about the way this movie looks, sounds, and feels, and I really can't explain it no matter how many words I throw at it. And you know what? That's what I'm going to do in the next video. A scene-by-scene breakdown of the film, going over all the little subtle pieces that make this monolith of a movie so damn enthralling to keep coming back to. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
All these little tragedies.
And will be continuing the search indefinitely until any evidence of Starla's whereabouts are found.
There are roughly 250 cases of minors running away from home every year.
Police say the man used a hammer to break a window and get inside that building. Surveillance video shows the person taking several items and then
Richard Taylor, who is being sentenced to life in prison for sexually abusing 2 young boys.
Now, I've seen the cells for people like you, and you're skinny, you're small, and you're getting ready to think the power of maybe daylight. You will rock.
Says it's relaxing carry-on rules because it wants employees to focus on higher priority threats like explosives.
We are clearing out the brush.
While digging in the ground, he found a grenade.
Still have the pen in it.
He shut down 7th Street and searched the area.
So now that we've talked about the synopsis of TCM, let's do a breakdown of the film scene by scene to look for various themes, possible symbolism, and look at the little things that make this movie such a big deal. Like I said in the last video, I don't own the movie and it's not my intention to show the whole thing in some sort of plagiarism-based way, but to explain the complexities of how film works from an analytical angle. Some folks might not know this and it doesn't shock me, but TCM isn't just a gore fest and a guy with a chainsaw. There's actually some deeper themes going on here, and no, I'm not the first person to find them obviously, as this film's been around for over almost 50 years, but I'll give some free spoilers away up front to get the brain tickling. The most common themes in this film that crop up in discussion are the following: criticisms of the meat industry and the treatment of animals, the horrors of reality, an astrological angle or some sort of cosmic horror vibe. I've also seen some view this film as a metaphor for human depravity that's buried in each of us. These are just some examples, and if I miss some, oh well, that's the magic of the comment section. That's your job, not mine. Like in the last video, I'll be using the same names like Hitchhiker and Cook, so if you haven't watched the last video, what the hell are you doing here? Anyways, let's get started. So, much like Begotten, you might notice I tend to have a thing for films that start off with text interludes. I can't help it. I grew up with OG Star Wars and I actually read books at some point in my life. Can you honestly blame me for that? Also, funny enough, names in the credits are also lowercased. I'm not sure why I find this interesting, but I figured I'd point it out anyways. We're being thorough, damn it, nothing escapes my eagle eye! This text crawl isn't just a great piece of foreshadowing, by the way, it's something that, much like in Begotten, gets the viewer immersed into what they're watching, and gets under the viewer's skin at the idea that this could happen. It's not even uncommon, but some people still believe that this movie is based on real events, which, yeah, we all know it's based heavily off of Ed Gein's atrocities, but no, this movie did not happen, like, flat out, it just didn't happen. We can also notice there's a lack of any background music, which adds to a sense of seriousness and sincerity to what you're about to watch, and the movie flat out tells you, all 5 people in this film get ravaged. It's gonna get weird. The text is also in yellow, which ties into another common theme of this film, heat. Now, I'm an Oregonian, which means, yeah, I know what 113 degree heat is, we get it frequently in the summer, but this movie is hot. Like, you can smell how sweaty and gross it is, and while this idea of heat is prevalent throughout the whole film, I feel the heat is also used as a storytelling device to add the idea of being drained physically and mentally, as well as create some sort of hellish and painful look to the framing, with a lot of orange and red hues dominating most shots later on. The screen stays black and we then hear the sound of digging. This is one of my favorite parts of the movie that always sticks with me because the first time you watch it, I highly doubt you'll know what's going on, and it'll eventually click in your head if you're paying attention. This could be another way Hooper wanted to draw the audience in and question what they were seeing and hearing, but also it makes me question whether or not this was a stylistic choice to make the audience feel like they themselves are being unburied as they lie dead in the ground. A common theme in TCM is also the portrayal of death, not just literally, but metaphorically. Characters are treated as literal livestock despite the fact they have families, lives of their own, and implied motives. There's also the uncomfortable idea that once the victims of the Sawyers are dead, they're not just consumed but turn into macabre art in an almost trophy-like fashion, and it's a wonderful bit of nihilism to show that even in death, the victims in this film are still degraded and being considered as something nothing more like a lampshade or an armrest. Now, on later viewings of the film, it's obvious that the person digging is the hitchhiker, or Nubbins, and the images that are flashing on screen is him taking pictures for his own sick pleasure. I don't think he's really concerned about what he's photographing or how, but I think he, just like all the other Sawyers, views death in a totally different light than a normal person. I mean, yeah, someone like me who's versed in all forms of the darker side of the psyche, well, there's still a level of understanding and respect for the dead that obviously borders on superstitious at times, at least to me. I'd consider grave robbing to be an immoral act, like, hopefully you do, but I think it's a whole different level of depravity and perception to make art or mockery of a corpse. Speaking of art, the first image of the film is actually the work of the hitchhiker. It's a very startling shot that slowly pans back and lets the audience feel alone, disoriented, and likely uncomfortable, hopefully. We can feel a sense of heat, both from the hellish lighting and the juice dripping off the art. I feel the art is meant to convey strangulation with what looks like a leg bone against the neck of the other's skull. The orange hue could also imply a hellish depiction, or something supernatural, as we also see the mist roll through the cemetery. Like, I'll always say this movie is grounded in reality, but it feels nightmarish and hostile, and I think this jarring out of nowhere intro is really good at setting up a tone of what we'd now call hyperreality. No, not that. I'm too lazy to Google a real definition, but what I call hyperreality in essence, as an art person, is the idea of taking aspects or senses of reality and heightening them to a degree that blows those aspects out of proportion without straying into the realms of fantasy. TCM sort of has this hyperreality of everything in the film being sort of fucked, for lack of a better term. Everyone that shows up has hidden, unhinged natures, and background characters tend to be just broken. The world is hell-bent on luring people into bad situations. Tragedy seems to befall every second of the film, but the area the film takes place in is quiet and contempt. I always say that TCM is one of the best examples of hyperreality because it's just soaked in misery, insanity, and death. Some of it's seen, and other bits unseen, and I'd like to actually point out this bit of detail here now, before going on, because it's somewhat important, I feel, to the entire tone of the film, the radio. Now, believe it or not, man, there used to be this thing that tuned into the radio waves installed in every car and in every angsty teenager's bedroom that broadcasted these things called radio programs. I know, it was fucking mind-blowing, right? Anyways, the radio is something I've not seen brought up a whole lot in discussion of this movie, and even in the commentary tracks of the film. All the radio is broadcasting the entire movie is just unhinged madness from all over the world. In the intro, on top of the grave robbing that's taking place, we hear of suicides, cholera, raging oil fires, and it's just all in the same day. Tobe Hooper has said in a commentary track something along the lines of, "It was just a bad day for the universe," and, well, yeah, it kinda is. Another subtle thing about the radio is this macabre broadcast just keeps going, and obviously, absolutely nobody seems to give so much as one singular shit about it. Like, it goes on in the van during the intro, and also shows up again towards the end before Sally's abduction once she's alone. I'm sure it could be looking too deep into this, but I also grew up in the budding of the internet and social media reliance, and one of the things that always seemed to be on everyone's mind was if all this exposure to explicit material was healthy or even normal for people my age. I mean, I'm not talking about shit like 2 Girls, 1 Cup or 1 Guy, 1 Jar. I mean having rapid access to things like coverage of the Iraq conflict, the eventual North Korean nuclear threats, and grown-up news like the housing crisis during the early 2010s. One of the first times I ever consciously tried to watch the news at dinner, I recall it being the Columbine Massacre coverage, and my parents immediately made me change the channel. And I'm sure anyone under 30 or so can recall the uncertainty and unease of seeing that 9/11 footage day one when you were an adolescent. In my mind, the radio was meant to instill in the viewer not only this background level of weird and hostile events, I feel it's also a subtle jab at how easily exposed we are as a culture to atrocity and how we can almost be desensitized to disaster because of it. I'm not going to get political, because we all know what happens when you do that, but think about how damn often it is we hear about mass shootings in America, death tolls during the COVID pandemic, or opiate addiction deaths. It's fucking unsettling when you really think about it. Anyways, before someone calls me a liberal beta cuck, let's talk about the sun. I vote libertarian for the record. Yep, that's what this red and black mass is, and I believe it's actually stock footage of a solar storm. We also get to hear Tobe Hooper's fucking awesome dark metallic music, and it really is what gives this movie an extra edge in terms of atmosphere. It's composed of metallic and distorted sounds mixed with percussive pangs and bangs, and it's fucking impressive for the time it came out. And I think it might be some of the earliest ambient music I can think of, and surprise surprise, this OST was a big influence on me as a musician, and probably many others. The sun could not only represent the heat of the film, but also the boiling violence and madness that runs throughout the film. The red and black tones are aggressive colors, and combined with the metallic sounds, it evokes violence, blood, and hellish nature. So, Tuesdays for me, basically. As the ambient track climaxes, we also end on a shot of the sun, this time from a camera lens, and it appears to be dead center in the screen with an odd color hue of sickly green, dark yellow, and black. These colors just don't look natural, at least to me, and the clouds that roll by almost appear like heat waves or gas coming off of the sun. It's almost like the sun is presenting itself to us on the musical crescendo, and it's staring at us like a giant universal eyeball, and I think that was the intention of this little shot, as we also see similar ones later on in the film. The fade into the armadillo on the road is also not only to show you, hey man, this movie has a lot of death in it, get used to it. It may also be used to show you where the movie takes place. You see, as an Oregonian, we don't have these weird creatures like armadillos, so I guess if you're from Texas, you're like, oh yeah man, those are like our state animal. Well, cool, fuck you, we don't have those here. Call me when you get some pelt, bro. This shot could also be used to show that road-killed animals are so casual to us as drivers and passerby, playing into the desensitizing aspect of death in our culture. Now, I'd like to go over the characters now before we get any further, and I can see you rolling your eyes and going, now Seth, this is a horror movie. How much character can really be in there? And you know, you're kind of right, but still, there is some detail I feel is important, and it's why characters in TCM are a little bit more nuanced than, say, the teens in the Friday the 13th franchise. Let's start with Pam. Pam is portrayed as somewhat gullible, a little ditzy and free-spirited, and into the supernatural aspects of life. Also recall this time in American culture was full of counterculture, and concepts like astrology and magic with a K were really against traditional American values at the time, so her interest in new wave stuff would have been relevant to the time this film was made in. Her outfit is also quite striking, with red short shorts and a backless top, which shows she's comfortable with herself and her appearance. Plus, this outfit was also chosen to highlight her death, according to Tobe Hooper in a commentary track. It's also implied that she's a vegetarian based on her line of, people shouldn't kill animals for food. Kirk, Pam's boyfriend, is portrayed as a calm, pacifist-type character, which is also reflected in his outfit colors of lighter blue. I'm not sure if I'd qualify his hair as long by today's standards, but I can see his hair appearing unkempt or rebellious for the time. Another interesting thing about Kirk is that he wears a cross on his neck, and is even questioned by Jerry about whether or not he believes Pam about her superstitious nature. It may be a bit of a stretch to infer this, but I think Kirk doesn't buy into the astrology Pam talks about, and likely humors her because he's an average guy who's not very argumentative or confrontational. Jerry is the wise ass of the group with the most outrageously ugly outfit of all. Based on what I mentioned about him asking Kirk about Pam's bullshit, it's safe to assume he's a no-nonsense kind of guy. Sally, Jerry's girlfriend, is undoubtedly the main character of TCM and is portrayed as kind and soft-spoken in her interactions. She's not hostile towards anyone in the group and even knows how to deal with her brother's whiny tendencies. It's subtle, but she actually seems to care the most about Franklin when he falls off the roadside, and she also doesn't trash talk him like Pam and Kirk do when they leave him behind to go to the swimming hole. Even her clothing is mellow, and the lighter pastel purple of her top and the white of her pants may represent innocence or kindness. Yeah, I know, the colors were chosen so the night shots would be easier to film, but come on, let me get deep, okay? And everyone's favorite, Franklin. Come on, fuck this guy, honestly, and I don't mean that in a sexual way. Franklin is a total tool bag, regardless of his disability. He dresses sloppy, looks sloppy, and he eats sloppy. He has this air of everyone's out to get me, despite the fact that everyone there seems to care about him in some way, like Sally tending to his knife wound, Kirk helping him out of the van and even making sure he's got something he needs to pee, Jerry gets barbecue, which he gladly shares with him. When talking about the meat industry, despite her being grossed out, Pam at least listens to him and even asks how he's doing later on. Franklin is just such a fucking wonderful character, man. He really makes the movie for me, and I love to hate him and even feel bad for him at times. He has my second favorite line in the movie, after all.
Sally, they took the keys. We don't have any keys.
Now, we'll talk about the Sawyers when they come up, but let's move on for now. Before Franklin leaves the van to piss, we can hear the radio still describing brutality that matches a Cannibal Corpse song regarding genital manipulation. Fun stuff, but like I said, I feel this is just meant to show that everyone on this day is just surrounded by misfortune and insanity. This opening shot is also meant to make the audience aware of Franklin's disability, as well as foreshadow the ending of the film when Sally has to help him move through the woods. We can see that Pam is holding an A to Z horoscope maker and delineator, which is a real book, by the way, by George Llewellyn? I think that's how you say his name? I tried finding the section she was talking about on an archive of the same book, but I couldn't find it, and personally I could care less, because despite me being an ex-occultist, I don't personally find astrology fascinating or reliable. To put what Pam is saying into basic terms, though, Saturn is manifesting evil into Earth, which also sets up the idea that this film takes place on just a universally unlucky day. I may discredit astrology, but I certainly do think the movie does have a cosmic horror vibe, which has been outlined by the absolute unit, The Checkpoint Show. Go check out their video on the subject, it's really good. We also get to hear not only a character trait of Franklin in the complaining, but establish, once again, the heat of the day. When we see the graveyard introduction, we also see a tombstone with Pickle very clearly in frame for a moment. I'm not entirely sure if it's an Easter egg, but if it is, it might have been a reference to Tobe Hooper's earlier work before TCM. I'm not that dumb, I know Pickle is a real last name. I watched Rugrats, you fucking Neanderthal. Yeah, I'm gonna ignore Sally's nipples and point out another subtle thing that points this movie into taking place in Texas, the Southern hospitality. I may live in Oregon, but the Pacific Northwest has this kind of passive and quiet kindness that really only makes sense if you live here, but Southern hospitality is something unique to places like Texas, so it's a nice touch. The drunk guy in his rambling is also kind of foreshadowing to the horrors of the Sawyers, because it's likely that Nubbins has left little monuments and such all over the area, and this drunk dude might have actually come across them. But I feel this scene was also made to break up the enthusiasm from moments ago. The music sting is subtle and also helps convey that this guy kind of freaks Franklin out. When the group starts driving past the slaughterhouse, we also get another establishing moment for Franklin in that he's not bothered by both the smell, which is pretty fucking nasty by the way, and the graphic nature about what he's saying to everyone else. We also get a bit of foreshadowing to the dinner scene as well, with Franklin describing,
Hey, you see those buildings there? That's where they kill them. They bash them in the head with a big sledgehammer. Oh, that's awful.
The shot of the van driving by is absolutely haunting to me, with just how the cows are looking at the camera. In my own life, I've actually helped raise cattle, and yeah, they do just kind of stare like that at times, but this is meant to be like the cows are staring at you before they're killed, which, let's be real, these were real cows that were going to be slaughtered shortly after this shot was filmed. Rob Ager has done a great video on the themes of animal abuse in this film, and I think YouTube took it down a while ago, but without showing or saying too much, yes. Slaughterhouses in America are notoriously hit or miss when it comes to humanity and treatment of livestock. It's really not a hyperbolic shot at the meat industry, it's just really that shitty sometimes, and this eerie moment in the film sticks with me because of my own past as an ex-vegetarian and an ex-hunter. This moment where the van passes by also makes it seem like the group is heading directly into their death and the Sawyers are going to butcher them. It's really quite cool. Pam's line of "it's still going on" is also a jab at the meat industry, not just for the inhumane practice of workers, but how mechanical the process of killing has become. Look, there's a deep sense of unease I get when I think about industrial meat packing, and there's no easy way around this, but when you think about the concept too hard, it'll really mess you up on an existential level. When I used to do inventory at my old job in a walk-in freezer, I'd be the only one there with no other noise other than the sound of the coolant system. I'd look at the hundreds of boxes of meat and get this uneasy feeling at times that I was in a frozen graveyard, and it would actually make my count somewhat difficult if I thought about it too hard. After the gang notices the hitchhiker, we also get a really stylish shot of the van against the landscape. I love this framing because if we look at the objects in the composition, it's about 3/4 the sky and 1/4 the ground, which makes the sky seem to stretch on and dwarf the van and the hitchhiker. The angle also highlights the flatness of the foreground, as we can see from the tree line, giving the audience the illusion that this area is remote, desolate, and far removed from civilization. You know, the perfect place for lunatics, so I guess we might as well do a quick expose on the Sawyers. I'm not really going to talk about the sequel films here, of course, but we know that the cook is Drayton, the hitchhiker is Nubbins, and Leatherface is Bubba. All these names were given in later films, of course, but that's besides the point. I just wanted to do a little bit of flexing, okay? Let's start with Nubbins, the hitchhiker. The hitchhiker is the first Sawyer we come across doing, well, what his name implies. He appears as a lanky, young, nervous man, wearing rather uninteresting clothing and boots. The most striking thing about his appearance physically is his birthmark on his face, as well as his camera and animal pouch. The camera, Nubbins likely stole from one of his victims that the family abducted, and the animal pouch is likely something he made himself and contains all sorts of weird oddities like matches, gunpowder, film, foil, and God knows what else. I'm not an expert at mental illness just because I am mentally ill, but I'd have to assume that the hitchhiker suffers from maybe borderline personality disorder, possibly ADHD, and some sort of antisocial personality disorder. I'm not going to look at the comics or some shit-the-bed wiki article or future films. This is just what I always gathered in this movie alone. Obviously, he's a cannibal, grave robber, and overall lunatic that gets glee out of killing and torturing others, and his free time is likely spent scouting out possible victims and food sources, as shown with his glee at Drayton over his dead possum. It's stated by Nubbins that he worked at the slaughterhouse nearby and was the killer, having taken photos of the dead animals within and complaining that he lost his job because of the air gun, but knowing his deranged nature, it's likely he was let go for some other reason. When he demands money for the picture he took of Franklin, this is also likely a way that he makes money from strangers, or even possibly has Drayton sell his art or his hides. The next we'll look at is Drayton, or the cook. Drayton appears to be the most level of the Sawyer brothers and is the eldest of the three. He looks fairly kind and unassuming, which makes him the most terrifying of them all to me, because he's just able to blend in with the local area and not cause any suspicion. Obviously, he's just as deranged as his brothers, but has an odd sliver of humanity left in him, even proclaiming he doesn't agree with torturing Sally any longer and doesn't take pleasure in killing. We can see in his facial movements when he's jabbing Sally in his truck, he's also trying to hide some sort of violent urge, and he's actually got a slight bit of remorse left in him. We can also see him switch back and forth between rage and cordialness when Sally's in their house as well. Drayton likely suffers from BPD and psychopathy, and is even the more dominant of his brothers despite his rather standard stature and older age. It's possible he even beats Leatherface constantly based on the submissive posture he has during the pre-dinner scene, and that Nubbins barely shows him any respect because he's just a cook and doesn't have the gall to kill. He works at the gas station and barbecue near the Sawyer home, and it's likely he actually does sell barbecued victims to the passerbys, but I don't know how much because it's a pretty limited food source. When he's talking about not having any gas, it's likely he does sell gas at times, but uses a surplus of it at home to run the generator outside to stay off the grid. While Nubbins makes a comment about stopping by his home to drop him off as an attempt to trap the gang, it's more than plausible that Drayton is the one that actually lures the most victims, based on his kind demeanor and lure of shelter while waiting, using his brothers to dispose of anyone he traps to avoid suspicion. Drayton also is the one most likely behind the disposal of victims' vehicles and belongings with the car graveyard out back, as I really don't see Leatherface or the hitchhiker driving. That's just a funny image to me. Yeah, that kind. The next and most famous Sawyer is Leatherface. You know, the guy on the box. We as an audience know zero to nothing about Leatherface in this film, but because of Gunnar Hansen's wonderful acting, we can infer an awful lot about him off of so little. Leatherface is tall, strong, and fucking brutal. The most obvious thing about him is his face masks, which there are 3 of in this film. There's the Killing Mask, Old Lady, and Pretty Lady masks, which we can only assume are made by him to wear as a personality that he dons for specific occasions to supplement his lack of speaking skills. It's clear that Leatherface is severely mentally disabled, likely suffering from some form of Down syndrome, and is only able to communicate in gibberish and body language. He doesn't actually appear unmasked in this film, but later films would try to say he has skin issues or deformities that try to help justify the masks, but like I said, he just wears them based on what he's doing in this film. It's unclear in this film if Leatherface worked at the slaughterhouse based on the hitchhiker's comment at the start, but I always assume it was Drayton that worked there since he seems the most likely of them all to actually be able to hold down a job. We don't see what Leatherface does in his free time like later films would do, but here it's implied he slaughters and breaks down the Sawyer victims just like animals, with his first kill in the entire franchise being with a mallet and then hanging Pam on a meat hook to drain. The chainsaw he used was also likely the most convenient and simple thing he could use to process the victims, since it's actually pretty damn difficult to use something common like a hacksaw or a hatchet to process meat. What? Don't look at me like that. While Leatherface is still a monster, I mean there's no doubt dude he fucking kills people without remorse, it's clear he's not a monster by total choice and is more or less a tool to his family, both because of his butchery skills and his submissive nature. There were scenes in later films that try to humanize Leatherface, but it's always felt clear to me that he was just more or less a scared, stunted man who was violent out of protection for his home. He doesn't run off past the gas station, and Drayton even bitches out Nubbins for letting him be alone and ruin their front door. He doesn't even leave the roadside at the end of the film after he realizes he can't catch the truck, so it's evident he's being forced to stay put, because he can obviously attract attention to the Sawyer house. Hence why Drayton beats the shit out of his brother for going near the graveyard and almost getting caught, and demands Leatherface to know what happened to the others in the group. Shockingly, Leatherface also shows the most humanity out of his brothers, with him exhibiting fear from Drayton, paranoia and uncertainty about people suddenly intruding into the house, cooperation and respect towards Grandpa, and even curiosity or interest in Sally. He's a fairly nuanced character, and he's always been my favorite of the slasher characters because he's genuinely written and portrayed in this film as a big scared kid, and you can actually kind of feel a shred of sympathy towards him, especially in the scene following Jerry's death. And that's the magic, man! You feel bad, but then you realize this fucking guy grabbed a woman off the porch, slammed her on a meat hook, and then tore her into her boyfriend with a chainsaw in front of her. Leatherface is just badass, man. Speaking of badass, let's do a quick rundown of Grandpa and Grandma. In the sequels, they were fleshed out more, but here, it's actually a cool twist that Grandpa is just barely alive, and Grandma is essentially a mummy. For Grandma, we literally get just a few seconds to get to know her, but what a looker. We see she's clearly dead, and has been for a long time, but she's dressed in fine clothing and decor. I've always assumed that whenever the men killed a woman, they'd salvage her finest clothes and jewelry to give to Grandma as a sign of respect, and it's subtle, but we can see she has a taxidermized otter and squirrel to keep her company, as well as a fox on the floor. There's some other stuff down there, but I can't really tell what the other animals are, but they're likely more rodents, and it's always given me this vibe that Grandma was the matriarch of the family, and that she was the one that was into taxidermy and nature, which she passed down to the other Sawyers. To go with the matriarch vibe, we can also see her chair is larger than Grandpa's, and makes them appear tiny in the shot of Sally running away from the room. For Grandpa, once again, he's explored more in other TCM media, but here, he's almost a corpse, dressed to impress and chewing dentine gum. In all reality, the brothers seem to hold him in high regard, with Drayton boasting him up about his prowess as a butcher. It really gives the impression that even though Grandpa clearly can't even walk, the boys want him to be taken care of and given importance, hence why they let him have some fun that night and finish Sally off. Like I said, all these characters would be given more elaborate and interesting stories later on in the franchise, but here, they're more grounded and basic, and I kinda like it that way, because each viewer may have different interpretations of the Sawyers, since, shit man, they weren't even called the Sawyers until the next movie. The sign outside the gas station is more of a dark joke, "We slaughter," hence why it was dropped later on in favor of Sawyer, and, you know, Saw, Get it? I guess, based on the scant information we have about the family in this film, the real question that comes to most people's mind is, why and how? It's not just an everyday thing to wake up and say, you know what, growing food is too hard, but Jessica do look fine and tasty. Now, this is all just me and not taking other media into account, so I don't care if I'm wrong. As stated by Nubbins, the advent of more sophisticated and humane slaughter technology likely pushed the Sawyers into poverty because their whole lineage descended only from butchery and taxidermy and likely had nothing else going on for them, especially in a very rural area in an ever-expanding world. To most, this sounds like bullshit, but where I grew up there was a gas station, a corner market, another gas station a few feet away, and a restaurant. That's it. This kind of urban pressure isn't as uncommon as you'd think, because most of the folks I knew did odd jobs or some sort of self-employment to stay afloat, like how my family was in the hay and cattle industry. One of the many reasons we couldn't afford to keep the land was the fact that these kinds of simple jobs are just barely stable anymore, and larger companies and farms have more efficient methods of production. Yeah, we could produce O&P hay, or the more lucrative alfalfa, sure, but we didn't have the tech to turn it into anything else like animal bedding, or the irrigation to sustain larger operation on the acreage, especially in regards to our cattle, which we were eventually forced to subsidize and eventually phase out. We couldn't grow as many small crops to sell to local buyers, aside from what we could use to supplement our own grocery cost, and trust me, you can't do shit with 50 pounds of zucchini when you only have 2 people buying it from you, so the rest goes to waste or compost. I have asthma, developed a ton of health issues, and am deathly allergic to hay, so I practically became useless, and when I was a teenager, my parents wouldn't let me get a job and had me forcibly work on my education. My dad worked full-time, and his spare time was spent trying to work the farm, trying to salvage the hay business with his father, and, well, after my grandpa passed away, it basically became impossible to manage the time and effort. My mom also developed crippling issues with her spine, cancer, and just about everything else nasty, so you can imagine what happens next. My family divorced, the farm was sold, and here we are now. To say a family couldn't develop into desperation and poverty, resorting in cannibalism and theft? Clearly, you haven't noticed something I've been holding off on talking about, but I have alluded to it in my Silent Hill 2 video, so, well, buckle up, buddy, because this shit happened barely a few hours away from where I lived. Susan Monica, born Stephen Buchanan, killed at least 2 service workers and fed their remains to her pigs. She shot one of the men in the head at least 4 times and let her pigs disembowel him after she severed his legs off with a hatchet. Later on, she'd put bits of his body into trash bags in the barn after she buried the other chunks of him on her farm. She would also be seen feeding these same pigs dead animals, likely due to the fact that pigs in nature will eat just about anything and have historically made good waste disposals. The property didn't have running water and was contaminated with raw sewage, trash, and animal remains for who knows how long since the property was acquired by Susan in the early 90s. Not only that, she committed identity theft by using one of her victims' food stamps to survive. Like I've said, this was not only close to my home, but my dad and one of his coworkers actually did a service on the property before she was caught, and they both said the place and Susan just felt off, and like they were in danger somehow, and truthfully, they weren't wrong. In her confession tape, she even quoted, "I do not value human life very much. The only thing wrong with this planet is there's people on it." If that doesn't make your hair stand up, knowing someone lived in the middle of nowhere, lived in squalor, and mercilessly killed 2 people that we know of, and used a victim's food stamps to live a meager life, well, buddy, you're beyond saving, but maybe it puts into perspective why people like me, who lived in this rural and dying area, have such an odd outlook on life. To say poverty and mental instability can't cause this kind of thing to happen is beyond stupid. It's totally realistic. Maybe not to the implied extent of the Sawyers, but surely possible in cases like Ed Gein, where his secluded and private life was actually a front for total insanity and depravity. So, yeah, the idea of a family living off the grid and trapping people, killing them, eating them, and taking their things and barely scraping by? Yeah, man, that's all too real, and one of the reasons this movie hits so close to me and many others who lived in these kinds of rural areas. Anyways, back to sounding smart. So before we even hear anything about Nubbins, we hear Franklin say, "I think we just picked up Dracula." It took me a few times to really think about what he meant by this, because it is very specific, especially since at no point in my life have I ever heard this as a phrase, like ever, From my understanding, Dracula in all incarnations has been described as a long-haired, pale, sexy savage... Oh wait, that's just me. No, he's always been described as suave, sultry, and cunning. What I can infer from this is a foreshadowing to Sally and Grandpa at the end of the film, where Grandpa drinks blood from Sally's finger. When Franklin says, a whole family, it's also foreshadowing to the fact that all the Sawyers are unhinged and cannibalistic. It's pretty obvious that the hitchhiker is designed to make us feel uncomfortable, but I think his way of speaking about death so enthusiastically is what's really the driving factor of the scene. The way he describes cattle as they always stuck with me too, because it sounds both humanizing and dehumanizing at the same time. It's hard to see, by the way, but he's wearing a bone bracelet and it's easy to miss, but this gives us a hint towards the bone art we see later on in the film, and just like the camera, once you've seen the movie, these little things make you feel smart on repeat viewings, and you want to be smart, right? Like me. Also, fun fact, Nubbins says my favorite line in the whole film during this scene.
Oh, that gun's no good.
It's also worth considering that he's had these photos for a while, and it's a possibility that Nubbins has other photos of art or trophies, like the vandalized corpses at the start of the film. I don't know what this song is, by the way, but it's also a wonderful bit of dark comedy that there's this fucking psycho jabbing a knife into his hands, smiling and making people freaked out over a happy-go-lucky song, honestly. It's so funny. Speaking of why the hitchhiker cuts himself, I don't know, man, he's crazy. I don't think there's much more of an explanation than that behind it. Why does he take a picture of Franklin? Well, I pointed out it's more likely that he's used this as a way of making money from strangers. I don't really lean on this photo being a trophy since he was willing to give it away. We also get a subtle foreshadow to the end of the film here because Sally is the last one to talk before we hear, "You could have dinner with us," and we get a quick mention of Drayton being a cook. Why does Nubbins burn the photo in such a bizarre way? I kind of view it as a weird way of him internalizing the anger he felt from being rejected and a way to distract everyone before he tried to cut Franklin. Do I think he could have tried to kill everyone in the van? It's likely, but I think he targeted Franklin because he was competent enough to know that he couldn't walk and posed the least amount of threat in that situation. Also, am I in the camp that thinks he marked the van for Drayton? Because it makes sense, since this is all in the same area and the only place the van would go is forward towards the gas station. It's subtle, but the guitar case in the frame also could have been foreshadowing towards Leatherface's chainsaw. I say could because, based on the movie's production, it's likely it was just the most convenient angle that the camera operator could shoot at in the van. It's worth noting that the hitchhiker and Franklin both blow raspberries, but I think in this instance, it's just used to convey that Nubbins is childlike and erratic, while when Franklin does it, it's out of anger and childlike impatience. Our next noteworthy bit of dialogue also comes from Pam, regarding Franklin's horoscope of a disturbing and unpredictable day. Well, yeah, I'd say that just about sums up the entire film, really. It's also worth noting that the cover of the astrology book is positioned in such a way that the cover of it looks like the sun is being held in Pam's hands, which could also relate to the film's usage of solar iconography. We get a jump cut to an unnamed character working at a gas station that Drayton runs. I could be looking too deep into this, but it also looks like he's pinching himself when the cut happens, as it plays into Sally's horoscope that Pam reads off. This guy is interesting for a few reasons, so let's start off with what we see in the establishing shot. He's really not looking like he's the brightest, and I don't mean that as an insult to the actor, mind you. He looks like he's eating something off of his arm after the smash cut, and he actually only has laces in one of his boots. He's also shown staring at the sun for quite some time, which, I don't know if you don't know this, it isn't a great idea because it can cause fucking blindness. You learn that pretty quick from like day one on this planet. Why is he staring at the sun? I don't know, but it's important because when the camera cuts to the shot of the sun in the sky, we hear a musical sting, which could tie into the astrological theme of the film, and the sun transmitting some sort of evil energy from Saturn to him. Or he's just really fucking weird because astrology is kind of bogus. We can also see that when he walks around, he has an odd gait, likely from a birth defect or foot issue, and we never actually hear him say anything in the whole movie, we just see him wash the car window. It's also worth noting that he does it every time that Drayton walks over, likely adding to the idea that he's mentally slow and understands only the basic of commands. You could also read this as a character trait of Drayton, commanding people of lower intellect, similar to how he treats Leatherface, but I could be looking too deep into that. Regardless, as far as I see it, this guy is just some mentally handicapped dude that works at the gas station. I don't think there's any connection to him and the Sawyers in terms of their overall scheme. Speaking of schemes, I've always thought that the gas being out is just an excuse that Drayton makes up as part of how he lures victims to the Sawyer house, which is likely why he takes interest in the group because of the Franklin home that Franklin mentions. That house was actually across the street from the filming location of the Sawyer house in real life, but in the film's world it's relatively close by, likely only a few minutes away. Drayton also slyly points out the danger that will happen if the gang goes and wanders off around their home, possibly hinting at Leatherface as he basically acts like a guard dog and he's more than willing to even follow people into the woods. Now, another thing to notice here is that Franklin's paranoia really starts to set in after his questions to Kirk. It's not unreasonable to be nervous, especially after you just saw some lunatic dig into his palm, but this is a trend about Franklin in the film that I've really not seen discussed too much. He starts off having a pretty shit day. Things get worse, he gets paranoid, becomes deeply concerned, and his final scene is him actually trying to get Sally to stop because he can hear Leatherface. Pretty much everyone in the entire movie just shits on him and discredits him, which is both comedic and tragic because out of all the cast, he not only didn't want to go on the trip, he had the most knowledge of both the area and the situation that everyone was finding themselves in. I think he still would have been killed regardless of his caution because the car was out of gas and the Sawyers would have caught up to him and Sally sooner rather than later because of him and Sally honking the car horn and screaming for Jerry. On the topic of Sally, we also get a really cool shot of her being in frame of the empty newspaper cage, which makes it appear like she's going to be trapped, as she's noticing the mark Nubbins left on the van. I don't think Drayton or the attendant noticed the mark, as when the van pulls up, the side door covers it, but it's also likely he could have noticed it as the van was leaving. We could also see the cage shot as another jab at the meat industry, but I've always viewed it as a subtle foreshadowing to Sally being trapped at the end. As the van leaves the gas station, we get another wide-angle shot, most likely with a dolly track. I view this as another way of conveying to the audience that this is the middle of nowhere and could be meant to show that the group is being watched and followed, as the last thing we hear is Sally talking about the hitchhiker trying to write something on the van. I'd like to point out, as an Oregonian, we see this kind of weather in this shot all the time, but anyone from Texas, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but this looks like it's just grossly humid. When I see this, I associate it to an awesome, cold, breezy day, but I doubt that's the case for people in Texas. There's not a whole lot to say about the driving scene, other than it helps illustrate Franklin's growing paranoia. The shot of the Franklin house is one of my favorites in the film, to be honest, and we get an ominous music sting once we cut from the road, signifying danger and uncertainty. The plant life almost seems to be taking over the house, and the darkness from inside really stands out because of how bright the outside lighting is, and it's a really neat touch if it was intended. As everyone gets out of the van, we also get this really neat dolly shot that gives off the illusion of a predator in tall grass. We also see that Franklin wonders where the knife is, since realistically it's the only thing any of them could defend themselves with at this point. The shot of Kirk alone also builds apprehension, as, remember, going into this film for the first time, even with word of mouth, you might be convinced that this is the house the Sawyers live in, so it's a really nice fake out for the first time viewers. It may be incidental, but the off-screen laughter kind of sounds like crying or agony, and I'm not sure if this was intended because according to Hooper, the actors were told to just basically say random bullshit while they were off camera. The scene with the cellar spiders is actually cool because as a broken person who loves spiders, they actually do that weird little dance to disorient and scare off predators. The sound that you hear is actually added in post because spiders don't make noise, fun fact. Well, except for this. For sure, the spiders are incidental, but the whole vibe I get from Kirk wandering is feeling out of place, and like you're not supposed to be somewhere, which is a tie-in to Drayton's vague threat from earlier in the gas station. Like I said, I really feel the laughing is meant to convey the future torture of Sally, and it also highlights another aspect of Franklin's behavior. He's a petty, childlike dickhead, and he bruises like a peach. Now, I really love this scene, because if this is your first time watching, this is the moment where you can possibly say, oh shit, this is where it all goes downhill, because you have this first separation and the moment Franklin notices the snake art. This is an excellent bit of audio work as well, because there appears to be a fox skull and a snake spine on the pillow, and the rattling psychologically implies danger in being too close. Once again, this all ties in with the Sawyers being secluded and wanting to avoid detection from outsiders. The hanging bones look like deer ribs attached to some vertebra and string, and it's neat because it implies that everyone in the house was ignoring the very obvious warning signs of this place being, you know, in the words of Mahatma Gandhi, fucking spooky. The cutaway from the house into Pam and Kirk is also neat because it builds suspense not only for the couple, but everyone else in the house, who, other than Franklin, had been totally oblivious. Before Kirk points it out, you can also hear the Sawyer's generator, which subliminally sounds like a chainsaw revving. Nice touch. This shot of the rusted cups and pots not only reminds me of an inverse Christmas tree, it reminds me of the sounds the priest nomads make in Begotten, which could have been where the inspiration for that sound was. Go watch my Begotten review, damn it! The watch with the nail driven through it could also be a hint that time is up for these two, as the next focal point is on the couple as they approach their soon-to-be deaths. Sunflowers are generally associated to being a happy flower, so they could also be used as dark irony because, you know, hippies, flowers, fucking ugly 70s fashion. They could also be used as more sun-based imagery too, but my money is on dark irony. The car graveyard is also a nice touch of unreality because on the surface, this place looks like a normal everyday farmhouse and it ties into the theme of the film, deeper darkness that hides behind normality. It also shows the Sawyers aren't stupid in the traditional redneck sense, they cover their tracks when they claim a victim. Now, the generator also shows us a few things. It shows that Drayton likely was lying about the lack of gas from earlier and he was using some of it to power the house, and it shows us that the Sawyers are running their power off the grid, literally, by self-sustaining. Notice how all these camera shots appear to be far off as well, implying being watched or stalked, like earlier at the Franklin house. It's pretty neat since the majority of this film at this point has been relatively close, barring shots of the gas station's exit and the picking up of the hitchhiker. It really shows the vulnerability of our cast in my opinion, and it's why I always say this film isn't just good because it's spooky. It's because it's a very well thought out and shot film, especially for the time it was made. Now we get our first real look at the Sawyer house. I fucking love this because it's a stark contrast to what you assume it to be. It's painted white, which implies peacefulness, and it looks like it's in relatively good condition with some flowers outside, some nice foliage, and the fence on the porch and the top story look inviting. I wasn't kidding, man, it's the fake out. You think that the Franklin house is the doom and death pit, but this fairly unassuming place is where the true evil hides. I've seen some people say the swing is something Leatherface would play with, as well as Tobe Hooper saying he's like a big kid, and I get that. But it also shows the Sawyers' build and salvage because it looks very out of place compared to the rest of the house. It looks like the seat was initially on the porch based on the color and style, and the rail posts and chains are rusted and battered. As we see in a few moments, the family isn't just destructive. They scrap, cobble, and attempt to use every bit of their victims and their surroundings in a desperate attempt at living. One thing I also really love about this stuff with the house is that when Kirk is looking in, the inside of the house is lit with low lighting, while outside we see the sun shining through. There's also this really eerie sensation I always get when I see the wind blowing the animal skins for some reason, and I've mentioned this in my Begotten analysis that you totally watched, that subtle bits of movement are a great way of breaking up a shot composition because it rewards a keen-eyed viewer and makes some people feel like something is off. The smash cut to the back room is also really fucking creepy. We get this blood red wallpaper, a weird ramp, and all these skulls that just screams, "Don't fucking go in here." It also stands out in stark contrast to the lighting from the outside room and highlights the darkness on the left. Keep in mind, if this was your first time watching this ages ago, you might also even assume that something nasty is going to come out of that room to the left. The pig squeals are also effective because they're mixed in very faintly and give the illusion that there might be either a pig being slaughtered or somewhere else in the house. You know, because people do that. Shut up! Also, goddamn, Leatherface's entrance is one of the most brutal things in cinema history. It's quiet, uncomfortable, and lends to the idea that the main cast is analogous to cattle being slain. I don't think I even need to talk about it, man. This is just how you freak the audience out. The fact there's no jump scare, but instead a low tone and a loud slam makes the gravity of what you just saw really sink in, and it's fucking awesome. Pam's walk up to the house is also an awesome dolly shot and really emphasizes this idea of entrapment as the house slowly takes over the screen space. The music also is just this dull metallic drone and emphasizes mystery during the walk-up, and it even adds some tension as it stops just before Pam enters, which gives your ears a chance to listen since the last time someone entered, it was dead quiet. Since the metal grate is now blocking the red room, we see what we would eventually know to be the dining room. I can't stress it enough, man. Lighting is a crucial, important thing, not just to film, but everything visual. Because the darkness obscures everything in the dining room but the table, and that the gray shade of it helps draw the eye to the slit in the curtains, which, God, I've seen this movie a million times, but never noticed that skull looking out until this review. Let's glance around what I call the living room. Well, unliving room. Why are there so many feathers on the ground? I don't know, because it's weird? They can't all be from that single chicken in the room, that's for sure. What's the chicken supposed to mean? I feel it's meant to symbolize the cruelty of industrial slaughter and how animals are just crammed in together with barely any room to move, and the chicken is just meant to add even more to the auditory hell to the atmosphere of the scene. The sofa is just ghastly, but it's also really cool because the light shining through the femur on the left of the shot makes it seem like some sort of holy shrine, and the overall design of it is unsettling because of the stretched proportions of a whole skeleton. It even makes the skull at the top look tiny by comparison because of how it's angled. The skull with the cow horn coming through it just looks fucking brutal, and the feathers covering it make it look like a halo or some sort of faux hair. The skull pile is freaky to me, not just because horse skulls look weird, but because of the fact it's somewhat organized. I know this all has to be just set dressing, but it appears that there's some sort of semblance or reason behind all this, and implies that someone in the Sawyer home had the time and patience to organize a spot specifically for jawbones and skulls. Like, I mean, my house has one, but that's besides the point. You'd hate to see my garage. Now, these next few shots are so rapid that it's hard to process it all, but I'll just highlight a few of the frames. The skull on the top of the shrine has a hand coming out of the mouth, which is just wicked cool, and reminds me of the head crab reskins in Afraid of Monsters. We see what I'm guessing is supposed to be a baby skeleton, which is a lovely thought to process the connotations of. When Pam starts gagging, we can see a skull with what I'm guessing is the head of a hammer sticking out of the eye socket. You can also see a stuffed hand holding a light bulb, which, I'm not gonna lie, is actually kinda cool. Notice how the music in this scene is also slowly ramping up as Pam freaks out, which, like I said, coupled with that chicken, really adds to this all-encompassing feeling of total sensory overload, and your eyes are processing so much stimuli at once with the rapid cuts and cluttered environment. Now, another cool thing about when Leatherface comes back to the fray is that he's exactly where you saw him last, and he hasn't magically teleported out of some random room. He was either too busy doing something with Kirk and couldn't hear Pam, or he was too freaked out and needed to try and find the right time to show himself. I'll let you decide because I feel this is open for interpretation, and I really lean into the idea of him being afraid and trying to defend the house, because it's the only place he really knows. We can also see more clearly that Leatherface is a big boy, and not only that, he's strong, because he easily grabs Pam without hardly any struggle. This is also a super nerve-wracking scene, and it had to be even more uneasy for the first people to have ever watched this movie. The meat hook is also the focal point of this shot, and the outfit Pam's been wearing this whole film starts to make a whole lot more sense when you think about it. I mean, this isn't a hard to parse scene either. It's essentially showing the fine line of cruelty that lies in meat processing. And even as an ex-hunter, it's pretty hard to not feel a bit of unease because, yeah, obviously the animal you'd hung would already be dead and dressed, but it doesn't change the fact that this is a perversion of an otherwise standard butcher's tool. The fact the hook rack looks so out of place in the kitchen is also another layer of subtle mindfuckery, and you can even see that Kirk is laying next to a meat grinder, implying that someone's gonna get sausaged. Okay, according to Word, sausaged isn't in the dictionary, and neither is the word fuckery, but now they both are, and the world is a better place. It's been said a million times, but the fact this scene is almost gore-free is not something to be taken lightly. It deserves praise. The sound Pam makes isn't really a scream, but more of shock and pain, and the blood splatters behind her are from the other victims. Once combined into a still image and without the sound, your mind just fills in the blanks, and this is the reason why so many people bring up the lack of gore. It's all in your head, and you freak yourself out. It's not my fault you get your freak on like that, okay?
My what? No, no. I love you.
Also, hey, look, there it is. He's gonna do the thing.
Oh, there he goes.
The movie is called This Thing. Here he goes. Holy fuck, he's gonna go there.
Jesus.
I love when Leatherface went it's Massacre in time and massacred all over Texas with a chainsaw. Okay, that meme's dead, right? Oh, I guess that kind of reflects the entire lifespan of a Marvel film. Oh. Dead memes aside, this scene always implied to me that Leatherface isn't subtle. I mean, fuck man, he's using a chainsaw to butcher a guy. This is during a gas crisis. What a fucking lunatic. Nah, for real. I think this little bit of overkill is meant to show us that he's working as quick as he can to process Kirk so he can move on to Pam, since using a bone saw is likely too slow and tedious. Or, you know, it's a fucking chainsaw, and it's brutal as shit. The cutout shot to me is meant to show that the sound is being muffled from outside the house, but also that the wind... You know, I've seen these things my whole life, and I don't know what they're called, so the wind thing could be a dark joke since it looks like a circular saw. I also want to point out, before we move on, imagine that this is your first time seeing this movie, like in the 70s, with your shitty hair and your shitty clothes. This has got to be the most heart-stopping moment in cinema history. From the moment Kirk gets killed, you go from silent to shock, to uncertain, to shock, to fear, to pain, to brutal sausage fuckery. All in about 5 minutes.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
One thing I've often heard from people I know and on the internet in regards to this film is the intensity and how it builds and builds until you're just emotionally drained. I've mentioned this in my Begotten review in regards to why scenes go on so long, but the point of visual mediums of entertainment is to engage and immerse the viewer. You can say that immersion in games should be added, but I think that's a different kind of immersion because the actual engagement can be vastly different from game to game. Film is unlike theater in that to achieve a total level of engagement, the viewer needs to be immersed on both the physical and psychological level. This isn't to say you can't get this in theater, but the shortcomings of theater involve the fact that it's all kinda human. Now, I've actually seen Hamlet performed at Oregon Shakespeare Festival when I was a teenager, and it was done in a modern style, which took me right the fuck out of it. This isn't a jab at the guy that performed either, mind you, but for example, the actor who was portraying the ghost of Hamlet's father was using modern-day sign language in US military regalia, and other characters were speaking his lines for him as he signed, with a teleprompter right next to him. It was, needless to say, kinda awkward, and any sense of immersion was totally ruined despite the really cool ambient music being played in the theater. Theater suffers from the fact that you have to suspend your disbelief so hard because you can see all the missing aspects, or stare directly at a dude's balls as he makes eye contact with you, and as much as we want realism in film, there are certain limitations we have to make amends for. Film offers the more direct control for snapping into your psyche based on clever editing, good acting, and the fact you can force the audience to look at exactly what you want, and you don't get a dirty look for it from the actors. This chunk of the film in microcosm is exactly how you build tension and release it in film. You can say I'm wrong, that's fine, but from my perspective, creating tension, and not even horror specifically, is done a lot like fishing. What, did you expect me to make a sex joke? No, I'm classy. You can't just throw out a line as a director and try to yank your audience to the surface, kicking and screaming. You'll snap the line, and people forget about the in-between struggles if you don't demonstrate them even more. If you'll let me, because you don't have a fucking choice, this is why I prefer genres like black metal or nu metal so much. Now don't get me wrong, I fucking love me some brutal blast beats and belting out the get-go of a song. It's a sign of a certified hood classic.
Stop it. Get some help.
It's all about controlling that wave of built-up emotion and sound, releasing it and letting it go back to full power for a bit. If you've never played it, I highly recommend Doom 4 and 5's combat pacing because it's this sea of violence permeated with highs and lows of difficulty, exacerbated by the chunky and brutal music. It fits the animal parts of your brain fully and requires your entire attention to make sense of and do well in the combat loops. This is why, like I said, TCM is such a fantastic film. Immersion is total and breaks are few and far between, and by the end of it, you're never going to forget it. With the slow zoom in on the hitchhiker's blood, we get a visual reminder of what just happened to Pam and Kirk, as well as an auditory foreshadowing of Franklin's eventual fate to Leatherface. I also like how Sally, despite being the voice of reason in the earlier part of the film, is actually dismissive of Franklin here, even though he's correct to worry. We notice as the audience that it's getting darker, and we get a subtle cue that there's nothing to fight back with since Franklin or Sally lost the knife from earlier. I highly doubt these teens in the 70s were rootin' tootin' cowboys and just packed 45s, okay? For a first-time viewer, I like that Leatherface has now been established as a threat, and we see the classic trope of characters wandering off to their inevitable deaths, But based on this low-angle shot of Jerry walking off, we once again get the sensation that the camera is like a predator, and the behind-the-back shot really makes the surrounding forest look like it's engulfing him. I also like this scene of Sally and Franklin talking. It really helps sell the fact that they're related, and this isn't the first time she's heard him whine about some stupid shit. I don't know, from what I understand about sibling relationships, as the only child, there's just nothing but violence and hatred, so I just assume this is what it's like. This shot of Jerry walking towards the sun is unsettling and gives off a similar vibe to the opening graveyard scene. It looks hellish, unsettling, and ominous, and we, the audience, also know that this gate can only belong to the Sawyer home, so it's time to buckle up again. I can't stress enough how I love the OST for this film, by the way. I can hear the snobby armchair cunts folding their fat fucking arms and going, it's just noises, this can't be that impressive. To me and many others, this soundtrack is just the icing on the cake and really gets the job done at delivering this otherworldly vibe. It's simple, but it's mechanically quite complex for the time. It's evocative of the primal impulses in nature. It's fucking awesome, and yes, all this walking scenes track is likely a metallic bucket with some water and a mock crash symbol, but it's a combination of lows and highs that imply imminent danger, and then we hear the low metallic dirge kick in as Jerry walks around the corner to what we now know is certain death. You could call it lazy to recycle the same shot composition of Kirk and Jerry, but I think this was deliberate because it's the same idea. Person finds house, looks into house. However, Jerry is more observant, but also much more cocky. Look at this smug fuck, just want to rip that hair off of his head and say, "Get a job, you Marxist." The sounds are mixed kind of odd to me at least, because they sound way too loud, like they're mere feet from Jerry. I love to give this movie a massive hand job, but this always makes me slow my pace because it just doesn't seem quite correct, and it's kind of sloppy in terms of audio editing. I wouldn't mind if those rattling sounds were audible, but I'd personally cut out the muffled noises that I'm assuming Leatherface is making, or make it quieter. See, I can't honestly tell where the noise is coming from because from what we saw of the kitchen, there weren't any chains visible to us, and Pam's not restrained by anything in the freezer from what we're about to see. Part of me also says this was a callback to when Franklin was hearing everyone upstairs having fun earlier, but I could be looking way too deep into it. Based on the sounds we hear later with the Sawyers all at home, it can't be Pam because she's clearly dead, and I think she'd be screaming for attention once she heard Jerry's voice. Like I said, I'll always say this bit of audio really takes me out of the movie every time. Wow, I think this is the first time I've said a bad thing for a video review. Mark your fucking calendars, you heathens! I love how Jerry looks down at that loading ramp, which is actually kind of clever because it's what tripped Kirk up earlier, and it really shows a bit more of Jerry's character having a bit more perception to the things around him. He's still an asshole, though, and ugly, and he smells bad, I bet. Like shit, and not the good kind. Oh wait, I used that joke in the last review. I got away with it. For a first-time viewer, this is also very tense as a scene because to the left we expect Leatherface to fuck Jerry up, but he doesn't. We also expect Pam to be on the meat hook, but nope, just leftover blood. And I love how the hook is the focal point of this angle too. Nice work. Once again, Jerry's arrival is a subversion to what we saw the first time. It's also subtle, but we see that where Kirk was on the table is now clean, with the butcher's knife stuck into the table, implying he's been processed and sent off to God knows where. We can also see that the chainsaw is on the table, which is a subtle way of saying that Leatherface's weapon and approach is likely going to be silent. Now, why does Pam flop out? I've always seen it as rigor mortis, but it's also one of the few jump scares in the film, so it gets a pass. It truly earns it. It could be bad editing, but it could be intentional, yet I like how we don't focus on Pam and first hear Leatherface coming before we see him. Don't take that out of context, please. It's also like I said earlier, this movie doesn't just lighten up after the jump scare or tension, it just keeps the pace up and doesn't waste a damn second. Leatherface also doesn't even seem sadistic here, he just kills Jerry in a quick and reactive manner that it comes across as a fear response more than actual aggression. The way Leatherface moves here also implies fear, and it's probably one of the first times in mainstream horror we actually got to see the killer do something normal. It's also a good job by Gunnar here because he does a good job of adding this tiny touch of humanity to the main monster of the film. The lighting on the shot of Leatherface contemplating is great, and likely meant to convey the broken and scared person, but also, you know, the guy that's just killed 3 people in less than likely an hour in the day, and fucking wears skin on his face. What is he thinking about in this moment? I don't know. Based on Gunnar's posture and mannerisms, I think he's likely in fear and concern with just how many more people are going to wander in. Either way, I feel it's open to interpretation here, but nothing's really off the table, honestly. The shot of the moon is likely to show the traditional horror audience, hey, look, now we're gonna do the thing you expected, okay? And it adds to the tension. This weird distorted string or wire can be heard, and I like this because it sounds unconventional and could also imply the archaic connotations to the word lunaticus, which we use in today's terms like lunatic or lunacy, going mad from the moon. See, you get some education with each of my videos. Also, in most pagan beliefs, the moon is considered an important link to the goddess and magic, yeah, the kind with a CK so you know it's real, so this ties in with the astrology theme of the film. However, a full moon could have a million interpretations, and the overall meaning in paganism depends on who you ask. Some say the moon phase isn't important, some say the more visible the moon is, the more potent magic energy is. Look, I don't feel comfortable generalizing this to one side or the other because it really does depend on who you ask and what type of paganism you're talking about. For the sake of what it means in the film, it means the ambient lighting is 100 times easier for the camera to capture. There, is that the answer you wanted? Because I'm also sure it's just a freak coincidence the filming crew managed to film on a night where it happened to be a full moon. Are you happy? Good. We cut from the brightness of the moon to the dimness of the group's van, right before it lights up from the headlights. I'm not sure the logistics behind this and how it was able to be done without the keys being in the ignition, because modern cars won't let you do this, I don't think, to prevent the battery from dying on accident. My guess is it's just something these older cars can do. You can tell me, I'm kinda interested because my knowledge of vehicles is so poor, it's why I do analysis on videos and not a real job. I like that Franklin mentions the gas station here, because it's not just a part of his character being somewhat nervous, but it's to remind the audience that it's the closest place to offer any sort of safety or help. You could argue that the Franklin house could be a place to stay for the night, but it's pretty decrepit and likely doesn't have any heating or electricity anymore. I like the subtle touch of Franklin saying they took the keys, because it's also a subtle hint to the audience that they're going nowhere, and they're totally fucked. It adds to this overall level of tension that classic horror films are known for. Nighttime scenes, someone wants to go off alone, and there's no way out of the situation. Bravo, Toby. The argument between Franklin and Sally is nice because it shows that Sally, despite being the common collective character throughout the entire film, has finally lost her shit with her dickhead brother and the entire situation. It's also kind of a hindsight thing, but I wonder that if Franklin didn't go with her if she would have survived the inevitable attack from Leatherface, so this kind of makes this a really bittersweet moment because it's the last few moments of their entire relationship, and it's spent bickering over a flashlight and Franklin's weight. Deep. This wide pan shot of the shed is cool because, much like Pam's backless shirt, this gives the audience a reference point to where Sally is against the backdrop of the forest because her pants and shirt color help her stand out amongst the darkness. This was an intentional play from the design of the film, having been confirmed by Hooper in the director's commentary for the film, so yeah, if you think that the character outfits are just random things thrown together, I'm sorry, but no, even in low-budget films, these sort of things are important. The dolly shot going through the woods is great, man. It really keeps this vibe of being stalked by a predator that the film is going for with the camera work. The screaming also gives the audience a lack of audio clarity, because if something was to jump out at them, their screaming would muffle any potential footsteps or limb breaking. This also shows to us how Leatherface was able to find them as well, because the only reason he's been able to get the drop on all the other characters so far is because they were shouting or banging on stuff. It's weird, but despite him being a massive guy, I like that his approach is always stealthy in this film, because it shows that even though he's not subtle, he's still aware that being quiet is needed in some situations. This could be a stretch, but seeing all the bones and hides in the house could be an indicator that the Sawyers know how to hunt, and obviously as an ex-hunter myself, you can't catch prey by just being loud and screaming in the woods. If you do, you're either extremely lucky or just bagging the world's dumbest animals of all time. There's also a hint here that Franklin hears something, which is cool because it adds tension and also adds to his character of being nervous. It's also worth pointing out that, like I said earlier, he's the only character in the film that seems to realize that shit's just out of the ordinary and nobody listens to him. When you consider that Sally survives this whole ordeal, this could cause a tremendous amount of survivor's guilt for her after the events, because I know I'd certainly think, wow, my sausage-sucking brother really was right and we were assholes to ignore him the entire time. Once again, the generator sound is a nice foreshadowing to the chainsaw's sound in a minute. You could also wonder why Leatherface goes for Franklin here first, and it's likely because he's the one shining a light and at the front of the two. We also get another usage of non-gory gore, highlighting the horror of what we don't see happening to Franklin. We don't even need to see because the implication's good enough in my opinion. This scene had to be the most seat-shitting moment in a horror film for the audiences at the time. I've seen it 100 times and it never stops being freaky because it's how you handle a jump scare correctly. You build up to it, slowly, and once the tension is released, you don't just stop the scene from being tense, you keep it level or amped because it keeps the audience engaged. A jump scare with nothing after it is just cheap bullshit, and it's my least favorite way of handling the tactic. If nothing happens after and the audience has nothing to keep being nervous about, it's a waste of fucking time. As much as it turns into a mediocre movie with a million plot holes, I think the basement scene in Signs is one of the best examples of how you can make an effective jump scare because you can see the alien's hand long before it moves, or the sudden way the Blair Witch Project just ends with Heather and Mike getting killed from behind the cameras. Like, a cheap jump scare is lazy because it's the most unsatisfying way to artificially add tension to a scene, and the common and overdone way is character A hears or sees or runs into character B is non-lethal, or the subversion is that character B gets killed by Danger Man C. It's so fucking overdone, lazy, and you've seen it a million times, and the trope itself has become so cliche and predictable, it no longer has any impact. It's like the scary monster face makes the scary monster noise while opening its scary monster mouth trope. If done well, it's great, but the way it's handled now is so fucking trailer baity and predictable because it generates buzz with idiots that go, holy fucking shit dude, that fucking monster had a scary fucking face. I'm gonna freeze frame the trailer for 60 minutes and overanalyze shit that doesn't even happen in the film and then make blanket predictions on YouTube with a clickbait open mouth thumbnail, and the video will be entirely dead after a week of the film being out, having generated hundreds of free dollars off of brain dead content binging idiots and making myself such a huge smart cunt for when one of the two predictions comes true at the end of the actual film. What, does that get under your skin a little? Good, it should. Remember when everyone thought Snoke was some fucking reincarnation of older EU characters, pre-Disney era Star Wars, and it turns out he was just a clone of the Emperor. Literally and metaphorically, because Disney is a fucking shitty hat company that appeals to adult children and neckbeards that cry when they see the Millennium Falcon. Pepperidge Farms remembers, because nobody is allowed joy in this world that isn't me. Now, I love the forest chase scene, even if I think it goes on for too long. I like that we see Sally struggle to make her way around all the bramble and shit, but Leatherface just cuts right through it. You know, it's almost like a chainsaw is meant for wood. I don't know. I guess demon flesh works too, because inside every demon is actually just bullets. I'm 12 gauge flavored. I love this shot of the Sawyer house at night too. It just looks so normal and unassuming in the night for some reason. I also really like how Sally takes the only route we've not seen of the house so far once she's inside. Upstairs, which is a really nice touch to the audience because it makes you think, oh fuck, what in God's name could possibly be up there after you've seen what's on the bottom floor. Also, why does Leatherface cut down the door instead of just kicking it open? I don't know. Tension maybe? It's gimmicky, but it also makes sense. He's not gonna just break a window and hurt himself or damage his shoulder trying to ram it open. Now, this is something I love about the upstairs of the Sawyer home. It's pristine. The wallpaper is calming colored and the wood's polish is warm. Now, this could have been a reference to Ed Gein's house being ramshackled save for his mother's room, but sadly, I'm likely going to have to say it's also because the people that actually lived in the house at the time were using the upstairs to go about their day-to-day lives as the filming took place. I know, I ruin all the fun. I like how when Sally walks into Grandma and Grandpa's room, the camera angle makes the room look claustrophobic and tiny, despite the fact it's actually quite spacious. It's either a really good camera perspective trick to make Grandma's armchair look massive, or make the room look like the inside of a coffin. I love how we see Grandpa first, who looks kind of off, but you're not quite sure if he's dead or not, and then we cut to Grandma, who is very much dead, like almost like a mummy, once again, based on the camera angle from a moment ago that implies this is some sort of tomb and she's the beef jerky inside. The metallic scraping sound we hear also gives off the impression that Grandma's corpse is making the sound as we get to see her in more detail, adding more to the sense of unreality that Sally's experiencing, because let's think about it. So far, the day aside from the hitchhiker has been fairly unassuming, but with a bad omen from the whole retrograde shit. All she's done is go looking for the rest of the group, then suddenly her brother was massacred, she's been chased through the woods by a monster man, and now she's in a house full of clothed beef jerky. The way Sally freaks out in the attic is about what I'd probably be doing too. just this sensation of total loss of reality and control. I love the reverse shot as Sally runs back into the woods. It's padding, yeah, but it really sells the feeling of being trapped and helpless, and like there's no point in fighting if things were just gonna loop back in this almost Benny Hill-like fashion. The music cues here also go from what I was talking about too. They're very calm, almost dreamlike tones that lack any real punch to them, giving the viewer a break in the intensity, at least on the auditory level. When Sally gets hit by the branch, this is also a tense moment because it's the closest she comes to getting nicked by the chainsaw, and it also shows that for a moment, she's almost uncertain if this is really happening, like it's all just a bad dream. God damn, this front-facing shot of Leatherface running into the camera is awesome. It makes him look massive and like he's gonna go directly towards the audience. Such a powerful image. It takes a second to process, but I like how if you remember the Coke machine from earlier, you'll instantly recognize that this is the gas station from the beginning of the film, and it offers this glimmer of hope for the first-time viewer. Such a great choice to have the chainsaw noise get cut off once Sally enters the storage room too, because it builds apprehension as to whether or not Leatherface is going to try and cut through the door again. You really get this sense that Sally is totally fried physically and emotionally, and it's like the actress that played her, Marilyn Burns, is having a really bad emotional breakdown. It's horrifying to watch, honestly, because it's likely that Drayton does know what's going on, and this isn't the first time something like this has happened to him. It's freaky as well because once he leaves the room, he leaves the door open, and as soon as Sally's alone, we hear the omnipresent radio relaying the horrors of the outside world after a calming weather broadcast. And it's on the subject of grave robbing, just like in the intro of the film. Now, it's not subtle, but the cut to the barbecue is meant to show the audience the eventual fate of the Sawyer victims. You can try to argue it all you want, but we don't see any animals other than the caged chicken in the Sawyer home and the slaughterhouse on the way there, so these are likely 100% made out of people. It's a funny thing I noticed on my note-taking, and it's likely unrelated, but when we look at the smoking rack of the sausages, you can see one missing, and it's likely the one that Jerry was actually purchasing at the beginning of the film, so Franklin was certainly eating some human barbecue before he'd end up in the same boat. Creepy. The close-up is also a reminder to the audience of the heat of the environment, as even without the sun being up, there's still some ever-present heat going on in this film, and the low lighting also makes it look hellish and foreboding. Notice the color of the truck, too. It's a white eggshell-like color, which could be coincidental, but I've always gotten the vibe that it's supposed to look peaceful, and the top lights are reminiscent of an ambulance or squad car. Nice touch if that was intended, honestly. That psychotic smile and then following it with Sally's confused shaking is haunting, and it's one of the first images that comes to mind when I think of this film. The first time I saw this movie, I actually thought it was over here, and this totally subverted my expectations in a good way. It's dread-inducing to see Drayton's calmness here mixed with his sadism as he hits Sally because it illustrates, like I said earlier, there's a hint of normalcy still in him that knows what he's doing is morally repulsive. The radio is playing an uncomfortably upbeat song as well, which just adds to this whole atmosphere of sadism. I think that what makes this scene even more uncomfortable is the fact that Drayton, as well as the other Sawyers, aren't sexually motivated. Christ, that sounded weird to say, but it's true. For the era, rape, explicit sexual content, and violence was the norm for these kinds of low-budget exploitation films, and to see a male antagonist beat, torment, tie, gag, and sack a helpless victim into a vehicle for consumption, think about it. It's that weird kind of thing you really have to think about to make you get uneasy, because this isn't a crime of power or lust. It's just restocking the pantry to these folks, and to them, people are just another animal that's meant to be harvested, processed, and then used for decorations. Like, really think about the cycle of violence the Sawyers have been hiding for years, and consider the most unsettling part. They're good at it. I like the little joke of Drayton running back in to close up shop because it shows he's trying so hard to hold on to a sense of normalcy and hold a casual conversation with a woman he plans on taking home to have her head bashed in. It's also really cool because as the lights hit his face, he just looks ghastly, and I don't know whether or not that's an accomplishment because that's just the way Jim Sato looks, and I feel kind of bad because he's a caricature artist's dream come true. God, it gets talked about a lot, by the way, but this scene of him slowly going from concern to crazy in mere seconds, this is what good acting looks like if you're curious, because Jim's face tells you everything about his character, all from his facial expressions alone. This is a man who's a monster, but someone who still wants to be like everyone else, and he can't hide from his conscience. I've always had this feeling that Drayton genuinely hates the hitchhiker because to him, he's stupid, younger, and lesser than him. It's likely when he abuses him and Leatherface that the directed aggression helps him not feel so immoral and take his mind off the horrors of what he commits, but that's just how it always feels to me. We get this really cool lighting for the scene of Drayton hitting Nubbins because the dust coming up seems to hover in front of the light like it's fog, but then you consider it's probably like 80-something degrees outside and humid as hell. The way Nubbins also sits there in this submissive pose in front of the light makes him seem animalistic to me, like a deer, but it also visually portrays to the audience that he's afraid of Drayton. I love the metallic rise in the soundtrack as we get closer and closer to the house. It really adds this feeling of, oh shit, I know where we're at and it's only gonna get worse. I like the shot of the truck coming closer to the camera, but this shot should realistically be cut a few seconds shorter because the way the truck stops in front of the camera but then keeps going towards the house, it's always bothered me. It's kind of sloppy if you ask me, but oh well, it's fine. This is also the part of the film that we learn that Nubbins and Leatherface are related, which makes the audience realize that this family is a unit and not some disorganized tribe of weirdos. Well, that's kind of what families are, to be honest. At least mine was. We get to see that Leatherface is also shit scared of Drayton, despite the fact he's like 2 feet taller than him, and it's a great contrast to the previous scenes of him, because rather than being this monster mash of a potato, forcing people to scream, here comes this dude with a stick, making him cower in the corner, and it's actually mildly upsetting to watch. Once again, we see that Nubbins, much like Drayton, isn't motivated by sexual lust at a captive woman, just pure unhinged glee at the prospect of being able to torture someone. You get a pretty good triad of characters in the three Sawyer brothers while they're all on screen, too. Drayton is commanding, Leatherface is curious, Nubbins is gleeful. They're all hostile, bloodthirsty lunatics, but their base personality traits are actually well established here. I also think the old woman mask that Leatherface is wearing is downright creepy here, and I think it's because the mouth feels like it's in a permanent state of confusion, as well as the way that the hair creates a shadow on the eye line, giving it a much more empty and vacant look to the other masks. We can see Franklin's wheelchair in this shot as well, and I like that it makes the viewer wonder, in retrospect, whether or not it was intended to be safe for Grandpa. I'm not a sausage expert, by the way, despite my German heritage, but some of them appear to be uncooked, and that's just fucking nasty for some reason to me. This is also a good establishment of how the other characters interact with Leatherface, basically by asking him a question and having him do his best to physically explain what he did, with how he shows that he put his victims in the freezer, processed them, and then Franklin was the last one. Also, take note that he doesn't want to get close to Drayton here when he points to the wheelchair, and he only gets close to him when he's not looking at him. Drayton also name drops Grandpa here, showing the audience that this corpse-like guy upstairs might be alive at this point, and if you've never seen the movie, it's a freaky idea that these three cannibals just happen to treat a corpse like it's a living person. I don't know if this was intentional, but I like how Nubbins goes around blowing raspberries, still, almost like Leatherface's chainsaw. It's clever if it was intended. Pay attention to how Drayton walks up to Sally here too. He's shaking the stick, but he slowly lowers it when he tries to be cordial and converse with her. God, I can't stress it enough. There's so many little touches in this film, man. It's just really as good as I'm making it out to be. I wonder if Leatherface looks back here like, wait a minute, didn't I just see this chick? It's always cracked me up. The low-angle shot of the corner is great because it adds a sense of visual disorientation, and as the upstairs is being messed with, the camera slowly pans back down to a horizontal level. Nubbins also name drops Leatherface in this scene, which I think is the first time in the entire franchise it happens, so woo! There's some worthless trivia for your worthless friends. Something about this scene of the two carrying down Grandpa combined with the music is always just so weird to me. It's like some sort of ritual. Like, it's so orderly and matter-of-fact, and it makes it feel like they consider him sacred. I don't know, I could be looking way too deep into it here, but it's just creepy. This camera pan also confirms to us that we're only mere feet away from where Pam tripped earlier, and if you look to the left of Sally, you can see what looks like a skin mask sitting on a bar stool. Good God, the blood drawing scene doesn't freak me out because of what's happening. It's the horrible scream Sally makes. It's just primal and horrible. This is also the audience's hard confirmation that Grandpa is indeed alive, and I feel it was meant to be implied that he's infantile, hence the sucking sound and the weird body movements, like a vampire in a whole family of—
Don't say it. The last thing I need is a double feature.
We're in the home stretch now, boys. Tuck in your nuts and hold on to your butts. Unless you don't have them, then scoot your cooch and, yeah, I can only make dick jokes, I'm sorry. I like this silent ambient start because, like I said earlier, it really gives the audience a break before going right back in for a final bit of insanity this movie offers you. The camera work here is so cool, as it feels like the camera focus is from Sally's POV, and I kinda like the shit-eating grin Grandpa gives the camera like, yeah, it's not over yet, buckaroo. It's pretty obvious, but there's a great visual trip up here with the armchair, now that we can see in much more detail during this shot. It adds credence to what the hitchhiker was stealing from the graveyard. Parts of the corpse. Why do I think that? Well, the meat would be decayed, and arms are good eats. I'm not a cannibal, by the way, I'm just saying. Worth noting here is that the only stuff we see on the plates are meat, in case somebody tries to chime in about that later. It's subtle, but notice how Drayton doesn't start mocking Sally at first, and instead slowly starts to join, once again showing the audience he's not entirely on the same level of crazy as his brothers. Leatherface has also switched into his pretty lady mask, which I've always thought looked a little too complete, if that makes sense. It still looks creepy, but it never conveys the roughness the other two masks have in the film, at least to me. The switch from Nubbin's hand to the skull has always stuck with me. It just feels ominous and conveys the possibility of impending death while also giving the audience a glance at the table decorations. I love Drayton's insult here, and it's one of my personal favorite combo swears.
Shut up, you bitch hog.
It doesn't have any deeper meaning, but it also shows that Drayton does get defensive when he's called out on how he's not as malicious as his other brothers. I'll do anything you want is such a creepy moment when you think about it because, as I pointed out earlier, these three men aren't motivated by sex, and Sally genuinely is trying to come up with any reason to find a way to escape or make it out alive. And now for arguably one of the most tense moments in the film. This is just ramping the tension straight back to the roof with a never-ending assault on the eyes, ears, and the mind. This scene is so fucking pivotal to the film, and no other TCM film has ever captured this moment quite so well. The fact Drayton, of all people, is the one who tries to put an end to the torture is also unsettling, because he even makes mention that he has to leave soon to go open up the gas station. Shit, dude, this guy just flat out leaves. Like, this is just something everyone deals with, you know. Random woman's gonna get her head turned to jelly as my two brothers and fossilized grandpa just go nuts, but, you know, I got shit to do. God, the way Drayton describes Grandpa's killing exploits are downright chilling when you consider what he's saying. He's basically idolizing a man that could smash the shit out of a cow's skull, and it's such a useless and brutal skill to have, and it gives you this feeling that this cycle of unhinged violence stems back generations, and this decrepit dude in a chair, he's responsible for instilling this ideology in these three at a young age. Also, notice how Drayton doesn't even bat an eyelash at the idea of replacing an animal with a human, and it really does add to the anti-meat industry theme of the film. It also never feels any less intense to watch the near death of Sally, and each time the hammer hits the ground, you can feel the tension build even higher and higher, because if this was your first time watching the film, you would have noticed in the text crawl, there's never a mention of whether or not Sally lives, so I really like that even at the very end here, there's no way you could tell if this movie was really going to go all the way and just kill off every character. By the way, notice the difference between Leatherface and Nubbins here. Leatherface's body movement is very slow and deliberate, while Nubbins is shaking and freaking out at the prospect of violence. We even hear a warning to how Sally's gonna escape when Nubbins slips out, "Give me the hammer," before Sally gets a light hit on the head, and the camera starts to zoom in more on his face to give us the indication to pay more attention to his actions. I've never really liked this bit here, where it's fairly bright outside, but oh well, it is what it is. Also, remember the whole tension thing I keep banging on about? Notice how the music stops and everything just goes quiet, giving everyone a break and time to reflect on what you just experienced. Fuck, I can't even imagine what it was like to see this film back in the day and see that these two shitheads are still going after her. Keep in mind, too, Sally's escape from start to finish is all pure luck and happenstance, and I like this because all this would have been for nothing if she hadn't gotten to the road sooner. This truck also looks like it's used for cattle movement, but I could be wrong. But if I'm not, it adds to the whole anti-meat thing and serves as a bit of dark irony that Nubbins, the character so against modern meat practice, is done in by the movement of the industry itself. The zoom in on Sally is so cool because it's like, even if she survives all this, she's still gotta live with the fact she just saw a dude get turned into human toothpaste. I always have a little giggle when the trucker turns around here. He's just like, oh, fuck! This escape scene altogether is just great, by the way, because it also never lets up, and it really emphasizes the hardship and chaos of what Sally's going through. Nothing is easy here, not even in the literal last few minutes of the film. This trucker here is great, not just because he's an absolute unit, but because he's also showing us a crucial thing about Leatherface. He can get hurt, he can bleed, and he feels pain. This is such a small thing to someone, but to me, it's crucial in making the audience aware that he's not an indestructible force like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees. Yet again, the only reason Sally survives is because of the luck of another passerby. Like, no joke, this scene would have played out a lot differently if she wasn't in this exact spot at this exact time. I like how even now there's still tension in the film. Even though Leatherface is fucked up, he's exhausted and barely able to keep going, just like Sally is, and from these last few seconds he almost clips her with the saw, like it's so close. That look on Sally's face here says it all too. She made it. Just barely. And it's not even a, wow, that's great sort of smile. It's a smile of insanity. It's a smile that screams to the world, I'm broken from this moment on. It's a smile that she'll likely never be able to have again after the film because, you know, how the hell do you go on in life after this? It's haunting and such a great way to cap off the story. Also, just like the start of the film, we get this hellish-looking lighting along with the shrill and violent sound of the chainsaw, sending us off into the black nothingness of the credits. It's just... God, I love how there's no fade, no music, just nothing. It's fucking over. Stand up, get out of the theater, and think about what you just saw. Like, what can I say more, man? TCM is such a well-crafted and all-encompassing film. There's a reason it's still talked about today, and why it actually holds up. I'm sure there's a few things I missed here and there, but I don't think it matters. I think, if anything, I've demonstrated that there's more to this movie than meets the eye, and hopefully I've got you thinking about seeing what I missed as well. Either way, we're almost done with this hellfest of a film, so stick around and I'll talk about my own personal history with the film, as well as some other cool shit I didn't throw into the first two videos, so I'll see ya in the next one. Thanks for watching so far.
That's when they found 3 more grenades.
They say criminals have used trial and error to try to see what they can get away with. So the same people are committing crimes over and over.
There's no consequences to their actions. Write them a ticket and turn them loose, they just do it again.
One day, his son felt sick. School officials couldn't reach him or his son's mother, so they ended up releasing him to Richard Taylor, a registered sex offender.
Residents are facing unemployment now that Rough and Ready Lumber Mill is closing its doors after 90 years in business.
So here we are, yet again, rounding out another big boy project, and I'm not sitting there mindlessly clicking on Danger Men in RuneScape. I'm ready to move on. Yet one thing I'd like to add, like I did with my Begotten review, is how this film has impacted me as a person, because one thing I think all art has the power to do is instill something in the viewer or listener. Sometimes the impact is pretty small, like how I was watching Breaking Bad and noticed Jesse's mom was making some enchilada dish and said, "Hey, that sounds good," and I made something like that for dinner. Sometimes an impact is massive, like how I heard Batushka's first album after one of my ex-girlfriends broke up with me, and the melancholic but beautiful atmosphere of their music inspired my overall musical outlook and style afterwards. Then you have what I can only call sleeper art, where you're exposed to something at a young age but don't unlock the full impact of it until later. It's not just with my example of how Begotten was a lot like my own art, and how I'd seen the film in passing from a music video. No, I've got other sleeper art examples, like how the music of Metal Gear Solid inspired my love of synth and choir as I grew older. The look and sound of Star Trek Voyager, despite it being kinda shit, is so warming to me and just feels so comfortable because I do my grade school homework to it in the background when I get home after school, and I can't forget that vibe the show had. It was just so comfy. And of course you have stuff like the original Sims 1 being responsible for my love of isometric video games, stemming even farther back to my first exposure to PC games with titles like Red Alert, Tiberian Sun, and the first Diablo game, which my mom's lunatic sister described as that nasty Diablo game. Fuck her, Diablo's great. Yet you'll notice I find all these things positive aspects of my overall artistic and recreational side. I tend to replay the Metal Gear series every few years to enjoy the nostalgia of my dad playing it on the original PS1. I find Voyager great to watch when I want to sleep because it's just so boring. God knows how many hours of my fucking life I've wasted playing Diablo 2 just trying to get John Burr runes. However, what makes TCM so special to me? I was born in 1994, so I have no nostalgia of it coming out in theaters. I was born in Oregon, so I don't have a state attachment or anything like that. I didn't even watch the movie fully until I was 18, on YouTube, for free, because someone was kind enough to sacrifice their channel and get it banned probably a day after that upload went up. The legacy of TCM for me is that it was a movie I had only heard of, not seen. You'll hear a lot of YouTubers like James Rolfe, the Red Letter Media crew, and Doug Walker describe the idea that horror films in their era, usually the 70s or 80s, was this kind of forbidden or sleazy art. For me, this was kind of not the case. My dad loves horror films, and every chance he could, he would watch a Friday the 13th film if it was on TV, or make the wonderful idea of showing me something like Rambo or Terminator or Saving Private Ryan. You know, fun for the whole family kind of films. Now, as much as we joke about it now, this story means a lot to me, and it's something I kind of took for granted as a kid, but Jesus Christ, dude, I miss Blockbuster. You have no idea how special it was for me to go there with my parents to rent a game or a film. If it wasn't for Blockbuster and my dad's general lack of giving a fuck about the ESRB, I wouldn't have been exposed to things like the Mortal Kombat franchise or some of my favorite films like 300, Manhunter, or the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You gotta realize, in retrospect, renting movies with my parents is one of the few positive memories I have with them. Yeah, I know there's obviously more than just films, but consider this. My parents both worked themselves to the bone, had a horrible relationship, and making time for something like a board game or a film was special, so any movie rental, to me, meant that I'd at least get to see my parents kind of be themselves, if only for an hour and a half. Seth, nobody cares about your melodramatic. Shut the fuck up, I didn't ask you, you fat idiot. Anyways, I remember one day that I went to Blockbuster after school with my parents, and you know, obviously my parents would rent shit that they wanted to watch, so I'd pick out a movie or two, and they'd pick out a few for them just to watch. Lol, Lonely Space Vixens, Rugrats got away with it! I'd either have to find a picture of it or make my own for this series, but I remember this image of my dad standing by the new release section and seeing this fucking film staring me down. Yeah, I know, this wasn't the same TCM we're talking about right now, but consider this for a moment. I've been raised to kind of consider the classic horror films as kitsch, for lack of better expression. Okay, the better expression is fucking incredibly bad, but you get the idea. I mean, my older cousin Jason went as Jason Voorhees for Halloween all the time, so to me, horror films were just shit you knew was fake and kind of played along with. The image of my dad standing in front of that display with like a dozen of these DVDs all staring back at me, it's been stuck in my head for ages, and I remember my mom walking next to him and saying something like, "Oh, good old Leatherface, you want to rent it?" And just hearing that name, Leatherface. I didn't really know what leather was at this point in time, but I knew what a chainsaw was and had this instant panic response. I think it's one of the first times in my life I got freaked out by just the name alone, next to Nutty Professor, but that's another story. I just kept staring at that box, man, with that washed out sepia tone and that damn face, and I was actually kind of freaked out because I noticed my dad was actually gonna rent it. He was gonna rent a fucking copy of this movie, dude. Can you believe that shit? It didn't matter that you got it in a Blockbuster DVD case, dude. It's just the name, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was sitting next to my rental copy of fucking Spy Kids 2 or some shit. It just freaked me out because I had this weird fear that my dad would make me watch this or something. Now, when I was a kid, our house didn't have very thick walls, and we had really cool surround sound. One of the advantages of living out in the middle of nowhere was that you could just blare a surround sound, just like the theaters. I've secondhand watched Fargo, Scarface, and God knows how many other films because of that surround sound. I just recall my parents telling me to go to bed and hearing that damn movie. The ominous music, muffled chainsaw sounds, screaming. I didn't even dare go out and try to see what it was. Just the sound alone was too much for me, and I remember I couldn't sleep, and I just kept this pillow over my head the whole time trying to block out the idea of the film. The next few days at school, which I must have been in at least 3rd grade if I recall, it seemed like everyone was talking about this damn movie or the ever-popular Blair Witch Project. I can't explain it. It was just like the universe said, Seth's scared of this bullshit movie. Let's torture him and remind him of it at all times now. Keep in mind, Scary Movie was out by now, and obviously it's a parody movie, but that doesn't matter when your brain is a marshmallow and you think that the honeycomb mascot is real and lives inside you if you get too excited about the cereal. God, I recall this one kid. His name was Colt, and he had the, the kid voice, where it's like, it's kind of muffly, and he, for some reason, watched this movie and told me about how Leatherface would wear people's skin as masks, and it just freaked me the fuck out, because he was talking about this movie like it was a fact of life, and it actually happened in Texas. I conjured up this horrifying idea in my mind of a giant dude chasing people with a chainsaw in the woods, carving into them, and it just freaked me out. And like I said, this was all just the idea. Mind you, like I said earlier, I lived in an area that was heavily wooded and had to walk alone sometimes to feed our horses and cows, so suddenly, every broken twig or weird noise in the distance was now a chainsaw-wielding cannibal just waiting to turn me into an all-season Halloween mask. Every time one of our neighbors would fire up a chainsaw to clear out dead limbs or overgrowth, it was Leatherface, lost in the woods, trying to find his way in the dark to get to my room. Now, like all good 90s kids, I read a shitload of Goosebump novels, religiously read the Scary Stories series, and I was fortunate enough to be around for the Blair Witch's heyday. Couple this with my newfound nightmare fuel of Leatherface, who I didn't even know what the fuck he looked like, and I was a wreck to be alone outside. Obviously, you can imagine what would happen each time we go back to Blockbuster. I'd be looking for that damn movie cover every time, and I'd try to loop my parents away from the horror section because I could glance it like it was stalking me and never too far away. One of the worst memories around this time was whenever we didn't want to drive all the way to town to rent a movie, we'd visit our local market, which is one of the 3 buildings where I grew up. Inside, they had a room sectioned off for game and movie rentals, and we'd occasionally go in there to save time. I can never forget my mom asking the guy in there if they had any new movies in, and he just said, "We got the new Leatherface movie in," and it just fucking undid me. In my mind, our tiny town was now a victim of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, I'd have to be extra vigilant each time we walked in there to check for movies because nowhere was safe now. Obviously, I can see someone going, "Well, it just sounds like you're a big old fucking pussy bitch," and you know what, you're right, but I was also like barely 6 or 7, so fuck you, you're a big old pussy bitch, and I'm much more handsome than you, right? Also, I'd like to point out, I figured out the movie was fake somehow. I don't know how or when, but the idea lingered in me for so many years. I conjured up ideas of sepia-toned, blood-stained wooden buildings, deep, dark woods full of too many places for a monster to hide. Most importantly of all, a tool so brutal and so loud that could chew through flesh and bone like it was nothing. Now, one of the most important games of my generation was arguably Resident Evil 4. There's no denying the impact this game had on the gaming industry, and the fact some corporate shitheads remade it for brain-dead shitheads says a lot about its overall staying power. Once that game came out, you can imagine what game covers struck my eye the most, and the peripheral that came with it for some extra couple of dollary dues. I must have been in my early teens when I played RE4, but I was paranoid that one of the Chainsaw Ganados would come out at any time. The Bella sisters fucking did me in, man, and I'd always go down the route with the giant because that subconscious fear of a chainsaw enemy was so real to me. It also is interesting because Dr. Salvador, the Bella sisters, and Super Salvador are the only enemies in that entire fucking game that could one-hit kill you outside of QTEs and the Horsehead Plaga. That level of threat in a game was so fucking real to me, and that goddamn minecart section would have me shitting bricks regardless of the fact every enemy, even on hard mode, has drastically reduced health to compensate for the speed of the cart. Even in Mortal Kombat 5, there's a bit of concept art for what would eventually become the Slaughterhouse stage in MK6, and it just fucking did me in as well, where there was this stretched out facial skin on the arena, and you know, that was what freaked me out in a game where you could pull out someone's fucking skeleton out of their back. God, let's not even talk about House of the Dead 2's fucking cabinet, man. Needless to say, one fateful day to Blockbuster had solidified a fear in me that I didn't even know the name of at the time: backwoods horror. You could argue that I was more or less afraid of skin mutilation, but it was more or less the idea of someone or something lurking in the middle of nowhere. As I grew older, the chainsaw fear diminished, probably in part of the Gears of War series because, you know, attaching a chainsaw to an assault rifle is the equivalent of covering a big titty goth girl in black licorice. For me, at least. It was actually Davey Dustin, now Mythhunters Union, that got me aware of Ed Gein when I was a teenager with his The Truth About the Chainsaw Killer video. I swear this video is older than YouTube actually says it is, by the way, because learning about Ed Gein got me really thinking. Maybe the reason I'm afraid of the TCM concept is because of human depravity. I know I hadn't been fully destroyed about going back into the woods just yet because I hadn't had my first Sasquatch encounter. That wouldn't happen until I was 16. Yet something about the isolation and total uncaring nature of the wilderness as people like Gein just fucking danced around with a belt made of nipples, it just felt like a pagan fear. Now, let's fast forward to my first viewing of the film. I must have been re-watching Davey's videos because, you know, I actually watch things numerous times over years because I'm weird like that. I was 18 and in a bad place. If you dig through my old videos, and I'm talking my old TF2 days videos, I was arguably the most existentially fragile, emotionally unstable, and at the most delusional phase of my entire life. Like, I can't even lie. I was fucked mentally. If you think I'm bad now, oh boy. This was the time of my life I can only recall vague moments from because I was so mentally far gone. I was in a dead-on-arrival relationship that was kept alive only through me being gaslit and lied to. I was unemployed and had totally abandoned my family and school's plans for college. I was so deluded, just playing bass, video games, and isolating myself from all popular culture and social media. I had no concept of time, space, or anything. Just a vague sense that things will be good soon, trust me. I was having constant nightmares brought on by emotional insecurities, having started dabbling in the occult and OBE meditation, and of course the ever-present thought of my own inevitable death, as well as my friends and family. The woman I loved didn't love me, but I kept my spirit up, and as my family was fully divorced, divided, and I was losing my home in the process, I had no idea what the fuck the real world was like, and no idea what the fuck my future was. School just taught me that college was the only answer, but I'd realized later in my senior year of high school that's all total bullshit, and a creative type like myself had no place putting himself into 8 years of time and money debt only to have a piece of paper that proved I was a writer. YouTube was what I wanted to do because it was the only solution to me through making animations, let's plays, music, and eventually video essays, like now, to support myself and not have to lift a finger. Remember, I thought working was beneath me and that a creator like me was just misunderstood and that success would just land in my lap. One night after a seriously horrendous existential panic attack and a rapid-fire text to a woman who gave 0 fucks about me, I decided to watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I really can't tell you why, it just made sense. Having found a full video, I fired it up and holy fuck, it was a bad idea, man. I knew it was fake, obviously, but it felt so real and so visceral, especially towards the end. After I watched it, I just laid there and it must have been at least 3 in the morning and I kept thinking the same thought over and over. I'm gonna die, but what if I was treated like I was a slaughterhouse animal? And just, you know, if you've ever had an existential anxiety disorder, you know exactly what this feels like. One thought leads to another, it leads to another, and eventually you're just soft-locked into an emotional numbness. There's no way to really explain it, it's just fear and off, with thoughts like nothing matters and existence is a curse, why do I think this way? I can recall that I was actually crying and freaked myself out so fucking bad that I decided to go outside. Mind you, I was living with my dad at this point because my mom had left the house right before I graduated, but I think he was out with his now wife, so I truly was probably alone. Now, I'm not afraid to admit that I'm a very spiritual person, but for some reason, I just decided the best course of action, and mind you, this is very stupid, was to walk around the property I lived on, but in the horse pasture. Why? I think in my addled state of mind, I could sense something was safe about that area, and the moonlight was casting straight down into a certain patch, so I guess I assumed it was special? Now, you can say I'm totally batshit insane. I don't blame you, but I'm just telling you what happened to me. No, I don't drink or do drugs, I never have, and I don't plan on it, and at this time I was firmly an anti-antidepressant person, believing that my spiritual conviction was all that I needed to get through the depression, which... don't do that. I climbed through the barbed wire barrier and started to walk towards the patch of light. I was wearing some shoes, I think, but all I was wearing was some shorts, if I recall, and it wasn't particularly cold. Keep in mind, I wasn't toned just yet, and I was actually very unhealthy because I wasn't really eating any food from depression, so I'm this skeleton walking towards this light at like 3 a.m. with my brain fried from a panic attack and emotional neglect. You can make of this what you will, but as I walked closer to the light, I felt like everything was slower, and I heard what I can only describe as quiet, choir-like drones in my mind. I was hyper-fixated on the moonlit patch on the ground, so my eyesight was basically doubling the image and making this almost vignette effect with the surrounding darkness, making it even darker. I felt like I was spinning slower and slower with this calming drone reassuring me that what I was doing was totally safe. Once I hit the patch of light, I can only recall seeing some hanging moss on a tree branch, glancing one of the horses sleeping, and the hyperfixation stopped and the sound in my head stopped, and then I had this overwhelming urge to go back inside. I don't even remember really going back inside, but I somehow just managed to get back inside and sleep. Do I think this movie had anything to do with this? God no, I was losing my fucking mind. But I still feel that I think the intense feeling of being food for someone and not having a soul or say in the matter, to be treated like nothing more than meat, that freaked me the fuck out. It was this existential dread that TCM brought out in me, and my emotionally damaged psyche just didn't know how to handle it. I think we all have that one certain movie, show, or an album, and we get this one-off, deep, Providence-filled memory after the event. While I doubt most people would have the reaction I had after watching a movie, it's likely you know what it's like to be affected by something external on a personal level, which, by the way, looking back at over a decade later, I'm so lucky I didn't get killed by something like a rattlesnake, wild dog, horse kicking me in fear, or God knows what. I felt off for days, and no, even back then in my ruined mental state, I don't attribute this event to anything other than my ruined teenage mind and that I focused way too hard on the concept of the meat industry. Now, I used to be a vegetarian, and at this point in my life I wasn't, But it never really dawned on me how truly amoral and strange the concept of raising animals solely for slaughter is. It gets even more confusing because I helped raise cattle my entire life. The same with chickens, turkeys, pigs, and even my next door neighbor raised pigs by the hundreds just for slaughter. You know, it's very different when you raise cows in an open pasture in small quantities of usually 10 to 15 at a time, and you have a strange sense of joy when you're just watching them wander around in the shade or a creek or just relaxing doing something stupid, because they really don't have any threat or reason to be afraid of you. Raising 2 pigs at a time as opposed to 200 is a huge difference, especially when you're feeding them things that you either found or grew yourself. Obviously, as an ex-hunter, I didn't take joy in killing animals. I may have been a good shot, and I still am, but I never felt joy in pulling the trigger on something like quail or grouse. What I loved was being out in nature amongst the animals and watching them do what they do and just blending in. Hunting is one of the few times as humans we can actually put ourselves in a totally survival-based mindset, and I can't really explain it other than it's a primal and instinctual thing that if you get it, you get it. There's one memory I have of being turkey hunting, one of my first times, and I can recall calling in a pack of hens with their younglings and just seeing these animals go about their day being barely 50 feet away from them. Me and my dad didn't shoot them because it was toms only for that season, but in hindsight, I don't think I could. It just didn't feel fair. After watching TCM, I tended to hyperfixate on my first deer I harvested when I was maybe 13 or 14. Even when I made the shot and the deer went down probably only within a few seconds, it always stuck with me that life is fragile. It's one of the most humbling moments in my life, and probably one of the first moments I realized just how small and petty our lives actually are in comparison to everything around us. I didn't need to harvest the deer. I didn't need to impress my dad or his dad or anyone in my family or my friends at the time. I kept thinking after the film, what if the situation was reversed between me and the deer? I saw him hundreds of feet away by just some faint movement. There is no way in hell he could have seen me. That deer was just going about its day. I was about to put a bullet in it for some meat and antlers that we ultimately didn't really need. Anyone who has ever hunted, you know what I mean. You know that crock of shit cultural meme of, oh, the Indians didn't put anything to waste? Yeah, no shit. They didn't gun down buffalo by the thousands just to get some skin to trade and to starve out a culture. One buffalo, deer, or bear only has so much utility for a person or a small family. Consider for a moment just how insane the concept is of exterminating a species. Like, so bad that it fucked up the lives for thousands of people who relied on these creatures for warmth, clothing, food, tools, and tradition. Fucking an entire species up so hard that even now, like in 2025, it's considered a novelty to eat a buffalo burger because they're so scant and only exist because of conservation efforts. Long after the fact, by the way. It's shocking, but as an Oregonian, beavers aren't all that common, and it isn't too hard to guess why when you really think about it. This isn't some SJW left-wing rant, mind you, it's called fucking common sense. The concept of killing something senselessly for pleasure or consumption is bone-chilling. If you're one of those people who believe in that bullshit fad diet called the paleo diet and you think you're some Sigma male because you just eat meat, you're a fucking idiot and probably old and stupid, just saying. If you're one of those hippy-dippy save-the-whale neckbeards who eats only plants, I've got some bad news for you, friendo. You're still fat and you're eating celery and cheese and it isn't making the planet a better place. Real nature doesn't give a shit what you think is the right thing to do. You're trying to boost your own karma for a nebulous concept that doesn't even exist outside of human culture. A shark doesn't care about the seal it's ripping in half. A giraffe doesn't care about the leaves it's eating. A lion doesn't care about a gazelle it's grabbing by the ass. A stalk of corn doesn't care about the spider crawling on it. Now, I can sense someone somewhere going, Seth, you're crazy. You just talked about hallucinating in the moonlight, and now you're trying to call me fat, adopting this trend diet. I hate you. You're fat, ugly, and crazy. What does it all mean? Well, something I feel TCM can really hammer in is the fragility of life and the fine line of meat consumption. Think about it. The Sawyers are crazy, yeah, but there are people who've worked in the meat industry who've abused animals. I'm not even going to show it because I can't even bring myself to want to find examples, and they're too much for YouTube, I'm pretty sure. Think about it. Imagine if someone abused a chicken that's never even had more than a few feet to move in. It gets kicked, yelled at, made fun of, and not taken seriously. Imagine it gets slaughtered and then someone eats only half of it. That's a literal waste of life on all fronts. You can argue that it's just one chicken out of a few thousand in the complex, but that doesn't really matter. It's still wrong fundamentally. Imagine if there was a guy like Grandpa Sawyer who just got a sick sense of joy from bashing in the heads of cattle and boasted about it to people he knew. Is that any better than my story of shooting 3 grouse with 1 shoe on hopping out of a moving vehicle? What do I have to gain from that story? Knowing what I said earlier about my experience with deer hunting, it makes me sound like a fucking sadist that I consider that skillful. Or that deer I shot was a 300+ yard shot clean through the lungs in the rain. What about this picture of me holding some geese as a teenager on my very last hunting trip? Was it skillful or sadistic that I sat in a blind with 3 other people on my own home and just fired vaguely at a wall of geese and managed to get a few? What's the difference between me and Drayton using deception to lure geese in with decoys, calls, and a camouflage blind? What's the difference between Nubbins' bone furniture versus the deer I shot's rack in my dad's house, or his first rack that he still has from when he was hunting with his dad? What's the difference between Leatherface's processing of everyone in the group and a professional butcher, other than the tools used? Let's look at some other examples if I'm not making my point clear yet. We hang tees with a dead guy on them to show devotion to a religion. We wear clothing made out of byproducts of dead plants, in the case of cotton, dyed with crushed up plants, paid for with bits of paper that don't ultimately mean anything on their own. We'll advertise tacos and chicken nuggets as cute anthropomorphic mascots, even though they're actually the remains of plants and animals that once lived. The point I'm getting across is that TCM may be an extreme, anxiety-riddled nightmare of a film, but it really is a humbling reminder of just how thin the lines of morality and mortality are in our daily lives, from clothing, food, and attitudes towards death. TCM is an extremely bleak film, there's no doubt about it, and if there's one thing it does very well, is highlight how none of the characters outside of the Sawyers are redeemed, revived, or martyred. Everyone but Sally fucking dies. They die in callous, uncaring ways to be consumed and processed, all because of circumstances out of their control. I'm sure Franklin's wheelchair makes a great tool for Grandpa. Oh, Kirk's got some great posture. I'm sure his spine would make for a nice straight lamppost. Aw man, that Pam gal, well, her hair could be used for a nice wig for Grandma. I'd be willing to bet Jerry would hold Leatherface and Drayton over for a lot longer now that Nubbins is gone, and besides, he was just trouble anyways. The more and more you focus on the ideas, the worse and worse they get, because the scariest thing about this film is that the monsters are just people. They're insane, yeah, but they're still people. People like John Osborne and Thomas McGee, Alfred Packer and Armin Muse, they all sound like monsters on paper, but they're as real as they come, and that shit all actually happened. There's a monster lurking in the human psyche, and it doesn't honestly take that much to bring it out in some people. This is why I think that the original TCM is such a special film, and it's an understatement to say that the film isn't part of American culture. We know it's all bullshit made up by a handful of people, but to me, at one point in time, I thought it was real. There's still people that think it's real. That's why I think there never needed to be a sequel to this, or a remake, or a reboot, or a suppository flavor. Nothing in the franchise after this film matters if we just look at this film, because ultimately everything else is just emulating and aping off of what was done here. You can throw all the gore, swearing, and titty nipples you want into a TCM film now, but it doesn't matter because the message is pointless to try and recreate. The emotions are pointless to try and recreate. God knows the fashion is pointless to try and recreate. Jesus. Something I've often considered is how TCM as a franchise has never really became as ultra popular as something like Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street or even Hellraiser. I think a big part of this is the underlying message of the first film because let's think about it. TCM 2 is a hybrid of horror and comedy. 3 is trying to be spooky but with some fun. 4, you got something going on. And then with the first of too many fucking reboots, it's trying so fucking hard to be edgy and gritty and doing what we in the metal world call as back to the roots syndrome. This basically just means the band's out of ideas, we're going to go broke if we don't put something out. Don't even get me started on how the TCM franchise just shit the bed even farther into the floorboards the later it went on. Like, nobody seems to know what to do with this franchise. I feel the first film really illustrates that because it got everything out it needed to get out and left its mark on cinema history. There's always that one person who will somehow stumble across this film having heard about it from a friend or hearing it was based on a true story. As a metal fan, I still think songs like Real Solution Number 9, House of a Thousand Corpses, Wrapped in Plastic, Nothing to Gain, Dead Skin Mask, all these carry traces of this film's legacy. Games like Dusk, the Power Drill Massacre, and They Hunger will always carry on the vibe of backwoods horror and inspire the imagery that this film helped pioneer into the subconscious. Fuck man, this video out of all three in the series is a testament to just how the name in a box of one of the shittier films in the series was able to entrance my whole life and help instill a deeper sense of my place in the world as a teenager. Also, for God's sake, man, Tobe Hooper's soundtrack to this film is incredible and an early example of ambient or noise recorded in such an unconventional and primitive way that it's really quite impressive that it still sounds good and unsettling even after all these years. So, you know, I think I've waxed on long enough about this film, and I'm ready to move on to my next project. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
I'm gonna commit a felony.
I'm gonna commit felonies.